This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening to you. It's Iain Dale here until 10. It's 5 minutes past 7 on LBC. I hope we can all agree on one thing, that the primary duty of any government, it doesn't matter who the Prime Minister is or what party is in power, the primary duty of any government is to fund the defence of the realm. I mean, it's a slightly quaint phrase nowadays, but you know what I mean. If you don't have proper defences, you risk not having anything. You risk not having a welfare state. So when a former Defence Secretary, not only a former Defence Secretary, but he was also the Secretary-General of NATO, Lord Robertson, George Robertson, as was, he was Defence Secretary under Tony Blair. When he makes a speech, as he's about to tonight, accusing the government of a corrosive complacency on defence, you know something is wrong. Now, the Prime Minister has talked a good game on defence spending. But he's yet to deliver on it. The Defence Improvement Plan is still not published, despite it being promised way before now. And nobody really knows when this extra spending is going to happen. And it's not just the Prime Minister who is responsible for this. It is actually the Treasury, because the Treasury, in many ways, is at the root of all evil in government spending, because it has priorities of its own, which is never very open about. And defence spending has never been a priority for the Treasury, partly because they think the Ministry of Defence will probably misspend it because of their awful procurement procedures. A fair point. But we all know the risks that this country is facing at the moment. And when you look at the welfare budget, it is, around 25% of public expenditure. The defence budget is around 4 to 5% of public expenditure. That has got to change. Now, there are other ways of funding defence expenditure rather than reducing welfare spending, but I want to ask you what you think those are, or do you think that it is the welfare budget which we've got to look at and make some very tough decisions? 0345 6060 973. Aggie Chambray is here, I was going to say defence editor. Maybe you should be. Deputy political editor.
I'll stick with that for now.
Now, this is quite something for George Robertson, who's not somebody who normally rocks the boat. I mean, I don't think I've heard an ex-Defence Secretary or ex-NATO General Secretary make such a controversial speech.
No, and I think he might say that he has kept his counsel and wanted to urge behind the scenes until now, really. And we shouldn't understate how strong this language is, especially, as you say, from a former Labour Defence Secretary saying that the Iran war must be a rude wake-up call to ministers to act, saying, we are underprepared, we are underinsured, we are under attack, we are not safe. Britain's national security and safety is in peril, accusing two non-military experts in the Treasury of vandalism and saying we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget, and also set to warn of a corrosive complacency today in Britain's political leadership. He is set to make the speech, as you say, sort of any minute now. And he, of course, is the person who wrote the Strategic Defence Review. There is, I've spoken to some Labour figures today, some annoyance that he didn't wait a couple of weeks, 3 weeks until the local elections, those elections in May, were over, because, of course, it's his party. But other people in the Labour Party think this is exactly what was needed, someone to sort of be that jolt to people in the Ministry of Defence, to people in the Treasury, indeed to people in Number 10, to basically say, as in his words, the bright red signals of danger, and saying even a promised national conversation about defence can't be started. And of course, as you point out, we are still waiting for that long-awaited 10-year defence investment plan that was supposed to go along with the Strategic Defence Review. review that was meant to be published in autumn last year to deliver the plans. It still hasn't been produced. The latest we've heard was yesterday. The Prime Minister was asked about it when he was in the Commons, asked whether that would be published before those local elections that I just mentioned. He didn't really answer that. But we are told that, as he said previously, it is still on his desk. They want to deal with it as soon as possible. But part of the problem seems to be with that. There has been reporting around the idea that there is a funding gap of around £28 billion in the existing plans, and the Ministry of Defence, Treasury and Downing Street are all deadlocked on how exactly to proceed. We have had responses from the government who've strongly rejected the idea that we are under-prepared, and they said that we are delivering on the Strategic Defence Review to meet the threats we face, and talking about it being backed by the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War.
Thank you very much, Aggie. Well, Calvin Bailey has joined me, Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead and former RAF Wing Commander. Calvin, what's your reaction to George Robertson's remarks?
Well, first off, it's important to qualify that I'm also a member of the Defence Select Committee, which is a pan-party defence committee that looks at defence matters cross-party. So some of my comments are supra party, because I'm there to do a job for the nation, regardless of which party I serve with. The comments from George Robertson this morning, I think, is a very useful acceleration of the discussion about defence, because, to be fair, I've been on your programme before, and we've struggled to get across just how important or the increase in defence spending is, because it was very difficult to put context into the minds of those people, the public first, but also other parliamentarians. What has happened with what's happened in the Middle East over the last couple of weeks is some of the risk taking that has developed over the last number of years. I'll try and be as apolitical as I can. But General Barron's said earlier that he thinks the moment that we should have had a change in our calculus and thinking was about 2014, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, and at that moment we should have stopped taking risks. And there's been an absence of political discussion with the public to say things need to change. And so I think it's really important. The timing of it, as a party member, is quite unfortunate. And I also really don't agree with his proposition that that this lays on the doorstep of the Prime Minister.
Oh, who else does doorstep would it lay on?
Well, I think the reason why we have received the delays, and someone that would have been looking would have seen that the Defence Investment Plan, which is the fix, arrived on the doorstep of the Prime Minister in December. And I believe that he and Number 10 didn't think there was adequate pace. And so Lord Robertson says, that the 10-year epoch for increasing defence spending isn't fast enough. That has been laid bare past the Prime Minister's speech at Munich, where he said we need to go further and faster, and we need to bring the timeline forwards. And that change is going to require some change in the Treasury's thinking about how funding gets into defence.
Let me just remind you, the Prime Minister is the First Lord of the Treasury. I mean, ultimately, the buck stops with him. And yes, you can say Rachel Reeves doesn't get this. I suspect it's more endemic in the Treasury. It's these sort of civil service structures and customs that don't get it. But the Prime Minister is there to cut through all of that, isn't he?
Well, and that's my point, is that process, I believe, has started when the dip has arrived with the Prime Minister, but
that was December. We're now in the middle of April.
You're entirely right, but let's go back just best part of 6 months ago, when in front of the Public Accounts Committee we were asking the Permanent Undersecretary, so the Defence Select Committee asked the Permanent Undersecretary and the Chief of Defence to explain why the equipment programme, which is the predecessor to the investment plan, had a £28 billion black hole in it that we arrived into government with. No one had been discussing that, so that no one was understanding the size and the depth of the problem. And part of that should have come with the Strategic Defence Review. In the military, when you're dealing with a problem, there's a phrase that every military officer will know, which is the question for moment. It's when you realise that the question that you're answering has changed and is no longer the question that you're answering. Now, for us, everyone will understand that was very clearly laid bare when we had to put Dragon to sea, right? We realised that things really were as bad as those people were telling us. Well, when the SDR team, when Lord Robertson and General Barrons turned up on day one and they looked at the state of defence, they should have walked straight back out and said, you need to be clear about the size of the gap that is already there. So the starting position was negative 28 billion. That isn't what the problem is now. We don't know because the Defence Investment Plan hasn't been agreed.
But do you agree with Lord Robertson that there has been corrosive complacency on UK defence, and he's accused the Treasury of vandalism?
So where I don't, the one thing I think, and I think it's really unfortunate, is his use of the word of corrosive, because I can't see where that is. Maybe he will give us some detail in his speech. I would like to see some of those people. I mean, we've had good relations and discussions with the Treasury, with the Treasury, and with members of the political members of the Treasury. Where we've struggled to have some understanding is some of the vehicles like the MDM, which is a method that the Treasury hopes to bring about that will change how we fund defence, because some of the pressure is how you actually structure bringing about the money. Mark Carney, who is former chair of the governor of the Bank of England, is now Prime Minister of Canada, is leading a global effort for something that's called the Defence Security and Resilience Bank. He is trying to get the UK's attention to say this could be a valid vehicle for shaping how, and where we don't know, or what we haven't seen, is how the Treasury is going to engage with fixes when they're put to them. And it would be nice to see the Treasury come out and be supportive of those measures.
You see, Lord Robertson is also highlighting the fact that Rachel Reeves, in her budget, used what he says a mere 40 words on defence in over an hour. Now, that doesn't strike anybody as Rachel Reeves taking defence seriously, does it? Shouldn't we be having a big public debate now about whether there should be in the introduction of some sort of bonds to fund the increase in defence expenditure? Because at the moment, everyone says, well, the welfare budget, we'll have to cut that. That's the only big budget that can be cut. But, I mean, that's quite a simplistic solution, isn't it?
So I think it is important that, so what we have seen over the last couple of weeks, an announcement that was missed. The Treasury is trying to come up with a new financing vehicle, which is called the MDM. It's a way for purchasing with partner nations. There's two other nations that are involved in that, Holland and Finland, I believe. And part of that vehicle is how we go about financing large sums of disposable stocks like munitions, because those things hold very large amounts of your money, and that money atrophies quickly. It's like buying a new car. Buy a whole load of munitions and they instantly lose value, and so you're losing them on a spreadsheet. But we know that that's a bit silly because you're not actually using value. So the Treasury is trying to fix some of the problem by trying to change some of these mechanisms. However, it's kind of a bit late in the game trying to do that now. Some of this should have been considered maybe 18 months ago. And
or even 5 years ago, frankly.
Well, it was, in fact, in 2014.
Calvin, thank you very much indeed. That's Calvin Bailey there, Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead and a member of the Commons Defence Committee. Right. Colonel Simon Diggins joins me now, former British Army officer who's now a defence and security analyst and also a contributing editor of the Defence on the Brink campaign group, which I guess does what it says on the tin, Simon. What do you make of this speech that George Robertson is about to deliver?
Ian, good evening to you. Well, I think it's very interesting, as Aggie said. This is the man who also wrote the Strategic Defence Review, along with General Richard Barrons. And I think he sat there being very patient for long enough. He was very clear what we needed to do. And I think he's as frustrated as everybody else is that it's taken this time and still no clear action from the government to make it so. We'll come straight back to him is because you can't fire an MDM spreadsheet at the enemy. I mean, that's the real challenge we've got. It's all very well for the Treasury to sit around and say we've got a new way of doing business. But the reality is we need to have a defence that's happening now. And that does mean some kind of emergency measures. Now, how we do that is, of course, is up to the government in terms of money. We could look at the sort of the modern equivalent of the guns versus butter debate, which is cut welfare. We could look at actually having an economy that grows, which I think is the government's answer. And that's the other way. And there could be some imaginative ways using defence bonds and everything that goes with that. But we need somehow to find the money. You either raise taxes, get the growth you want, or find some other third way. There's nothing else there. In the meantime, as we've rightly been pointed out, we've been humiliated. The way I can describe humiliated by having to deal with the consequences of the Iran, Israel, and American war, woefully inadequate, not a reflection on the hard work and courage of our service personnel, but a reflection of where we are as a country.
You see, the Prime Minister, I think, has talked quite a good game on defence expenditure. He said publicly, we are on a war footing.
Yeah.
Well, we're clearly not, are we? Because if we were, they would be rejigging their budgets now. They would be authorising the MOD to spend whatever it needs to on replenishing our munitions, on new defence equipment. I don't know what is needed, but I mean, it's quite clear from recent events that a lot is needed. And that can't be the tap can't be turned on immediately. We won't get the benefits of what we spend maybe for several years. But by that time, it may be too late. So the decisions need to be made now, don't they?
No, absolutely. And if you look for people who are most worried about the threat, the Baltic nations, the Baltic countries themselves, they're very clear that Putin, they believe, is going to test NATO within the next 3 to 5 years. So that is before 2030 and before potentially the change of parliament and this nirvana of we'll have 3.5% of our GDP spent on defence by 2035 and another 1.5% on so-called defence infrastructure. Far too little, far little too late. And you're completely correct. We need to be, this is really a 1938 moment. And if you look at the budget that happened in 1938, they made a massive change and they had their own debate and their own challenges there. They said, no, defence is what we need to do for the next 3 to 5 years. And they changed the way in which they did their budget. And that's what we need to do. And as you rightly point out, neither in the budget last year or in Rachel Reeves' spring statement is any kind of indication that this is where the government is changing. It tells me that whatever's been said publicly, the rhetoric, if you like, of the Prime Minister and some of his ministers, the reality and particularly the culture within the government, that this is really now a matter of national, I will almost say survival, but certainly national resilience. That message has not cut through.
Simon, thank you very much indeed. That's Colonel Simon Diggins there. Cards on table, I think this is the biggest priority for the government at the moment, to explain how it is going to defend the nation if we come under attack. Now, it's not scaremongering to think that we could come under attack. There are plenty of signs of that. We have our main ally that is acting as if it isn't our ally at the moment. We have an American president that we cannot be sure would come to our aid if there was an attack, despite Article 5 of NATO. We have an international situation, not just in Russia and Ukraine, but also, of course, in the Middle East, which I think has demonstrated the fact that our defences are severely lacking. And yet we have Whitehall that is full of inertia, that is not willing to confront the realities. And I say this knowing that there will be some of you who think, he's just scaremongering to make us all scared so we're going to have to pay more taxes to fund defence. No, I'm really not doing that. I've spent a lot of today recording an audiobook of my book, The Generals, which is coming out in June. And it's a book of essays on 69 generals through history. And one of the generals that I've been reading out today was General Patton. Now, General Patton was an American war hero, but he foresaw the rise of Nazi Germany. He foresaw what would happen if Stalin was allowed to control the eastern part of Europe after the war. He was a man of vision. Where are these people of vision at the moment? Because they're certainly not inhabiting our government. They're certainly not inhabiting our civil service. And I'm pretty sure they're not really inhabiting the Minister of Defence either. Action this day was a phrase that was used commonly in the Second World War. That's what needs to happen now with defence spending, isn't it? So how's it going to be funded? 0345 6060 973. It's 24 minutes past 7.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why don't you get the Prime Minister on the phone and say...
27 minutes past 7 on LBC. I'm not sure that the great British people are fully behind a big increase in defence spending at the moment. They weren't in 1935, 1936. But the government of the day eventually realised that appeasement was not working, and even if they stuck by the policy effectively until 1938, early 1939, they realised that they had to rearm just in case that policy was wrong. Well, it did turn out to be wrong, didn't it? And we all know what happened. I'm not predicting a Third World War. I'm not predicting that there will be any form of invasion of Britain or even missile attacks. I think the likelihood of some sort of attack, maybe it wouldn't be in conventional terms, from the likes of Russia in the next few years is highly likely. Putin has already said that Britain would be his number one target if he did think of taking some sort of military action against NATO members. I don't think America would come to our aid at the moment with this president. Do you? So therefore, surely that means that the strategic defence review that George Robertson carried out last year is already out of date. And we probably need another one. Quick. Robert's in Leytonstone. Hello, Robert.
Ian. Well, I've been given lots of warnings on this. The only place that you can actually money from this way, £1 that you cut the welfare budget by, £1. Very difficult to cut the welfare budget. You're taking people's lives, perhaps under incredible pressure and that. And
Robert, I can't continue with the conversation because this has happened before with your phone. We only get every second or third word, and so it's almost impossible to follow your line of logic. Let's move on to Matt in Whitechapel. Hello, Matt.
Hi, how's things?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
I'd just like to say that I don't think we need an increase in defence spending. We've already spent enough on defence, and we need to invest in public services such as education and.
Yes. Do you know actually what percentage of public expenditure goes on defence? Because it's 4%.
Right, I didn't actually know that. Oh wow!
And do you not think that with the threats that there are in the world at the moment, the fact that we have an unreliable American ally at the moment, the fact that Putin has made clear that he regards this country as an enemy, do you not think that merits an increase in defence spending?
I guess so, yeah. Yes.
Well, that's the easiest argument I've ever won. Okay, thank you very much, Matt. Right, well, let's hear from some more people after the 7:30 news. 0345 6060 973. Why do you think it is that so many people seem to not regard defence spending as a priority? And those of you who do and agree with me that we do need to increase defence spending, how should we do that? Because I will admit that it's very easy to say, well, the welfare budget is the biggest in government, so therefore that's the one we must cut. And then you go through the welfare budget and you think, OK, well, what would we actually cut? Well, I've already mentioned the pensions triple lock from, quite often, and several of my colleagues think that should go. Well, that would raise quite a few £1 billion over a few years. There are other ways of doing it as well. It doesn't necessarily involve cutting other departments. You could raise so-called defence bonds or war bonds, call them what you will, and offer the public a chance to subscribe to them. Now, that would raise a good few £1 billion, probably. You could put up taxes to fund it. Now, there'll be a lot of screaming, not least from those of us who believe in low taxes. So what would your proposals be? What do you think the general public would stomach? Or do you think, look, government is there to lead public opinion, not follow it? The government should make a decision as to how much it wants to spend on defence and then tell us how they're going to raise the money. I think they would get a lot of respect if they did that, but they show no sign of doing so whatsoever, do they? It's 7:31 on LBC. Matt Hewitt has the news headlines.
In the last few minutes, the Home Office has announced 11 asylum hotels have shut, with more to close this spring. It says the latest closures will save £65 million a year as it moves to using more basic sites to accommodate people waiting to have their asylum claims processed. Sir Keir Starmer's spokesman has completely rejected a claim from the ex-head of NATO that he's complacent on the country's defence. In a speech this evening, Lord Robertson, also a former British Defence Secretary, will warn the UK is underprepared.
What we eat comes from unhealthy snacks and sugary drinks. If you want to change from a snack monster to a snack star, search Change for Life for loads of healthy snacking ideas.
Iain Dale on LBC.
7:35 on LBC. Loads of you want to have your say on how we should fund extra defence spending. Paul is in Tunbridge Wells. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Ian. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Well, I've just got a shock this week, apropos the ad that you've just run as well, about the cost of antibiotics. And I'm 76, and I've been receiving my medicine.
Yeah. We're not talking about antibiotics. We're talking about defence spending.
You were asking how to attract more monies into Rachel from accounts. That's what I phoned about, to say that if the general public and the pensioners knew how much their medicine was costing and they can afford it, then perhaps adding an NI contribution to pensioners deducted from their pension, those that can afford it, obviously, that would make a massive dent and would improve finances.
So, because at the moment, pensioners don't pay national insurance, so you think they should?
Exactly. I am convinced that the cost of medicine, that nobody out there really knows how much medicine is costing the NHS, and perhaps they don't need it, perhaps they do need it. I'm sure that but the long and the short of it is, it's thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds is spent giving pensioners free of charge all their medication when some can afford it.
Yeah, but that's the point of a health service, free at the point of delivery. I mean, what you're talking about is means testing medicine there. I mean, I don't think people would generally approve of that.
I'm not accepting that. I will accept completely that people wouldn't want to pay. I'm suggesting that if an NI contribution, apropos of whatever their tax return is each year, that they can afford to make a contribution, which can go to Rachel in accounts.
Okay, well, we don't need to have pejorative descriptions of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Thank you very much. Graham is in Clacton. Hello, Graham.
Good evening, Ian.
Evening.
I get annoyed when all the time I hear it always reverts back to the benefit system. You know, the benefit system that for all these poor people that are having to get benefits because the most of the companies don't pay a decent wage anymore. The benefits, you know, I mean, the other side of it is the biggest benefit bill is the pensions. It is the pensions. But we've all worked, like I've worked over 40 years. Right, I've got another 4 years left to get my pension. I don't want to be getting to the end of my time and they go, I'm sorry, mate, but you haven't got, hang on, I've paid in for 50 years, like.
Well, you know, the problem is...
The system's not the answer. You don't have to keep taking people off money off people that haven't got any money.
Well, let me just read out this to you, which is from it's a newspaper article today. The number of people claiming universal credit increased by 63,000 last month, with 25,000 of these new claimants not being required to search for work. Now, that's the equivalent of around, somewhere between 700 and 800,000 people extra every year claiming universal credit. And that is also half of them not being required to work. That system is unsustainable.
So let's stop the benefits for everybody that comes in illegal to start with, because let's face it, Ian, they do get benefits. You can't say they don't, because they do get benefits. And I don't mean a couple of quid to keep them going. You know what I mean? They're getting money off. They do get money off the benefits benefit system. A lot of them don't work because they can't talk the language. A lot of it.
Well, even if you
shouldn't be happening,
even if you did that would be a relatively small dent in the welfare budget.
Millions.
Yeah, it would be millions, but it wouldn't be billions.
No, well, you're not going to cut billions off the welfare budget either.
Well, hang on a minute. The welfare budget, including pensions, because it does come under the DWP, it is around £320 billion a year. By 2030, it's going to be £430 billion a year. For the first time in this country, we're spending more on welfare than we take in on income tax. That is not sustainable. And until politicians actually grapple with that, I'm afraid we'll never be able to solve this conundrum.
I agree with you to a point, Ian, but also what I would say is that a lot of people, I don't know what the percentage is, get tax credits because the companies that they're working for do not pay them enough wages to live on. I don't understand how
Well, I agree with you. That is a problem.
To go to work for somebody else. Do you know what I mean?
That is a problem. This all started under Gordon Brown, and he effectively introduced this system which subsidises employers. And like you, I think I don't agree with it. I think it's wrong, and it's a perverse system. You can't abolish it. Hang on a second. You can't abolish it overnight, but you can start to phase it out. And that's what the government should be doing, but they won't because they will think it's politically unacceptable.
But it's only acceptable when you're trying to get money off the rich. This is the point, Ian. So what they're doing is, let's get the money off the poor. Let's get the money off the people who are on benefits, not because of choice, but because the rich are not paying them enough money to work for them. You know for a fact.
Well, first of all, not all people who own companies are rich.
Well, a lot of companies now, a lot of the big companies, that probably none of the taxes come into the country anyway, because they probably.
Well, again, you're exaggerating to make a point.
No, I'm not.
Well, you are. Oh, they all pay some degree of tax. We can probably agree that there are plenty of big companies that don't pay enough. But this whole idea that companies don't pay tax, believe me, the welfare system would collapse if we didn't have receipts from corporation tax. And the fact is, the top 1% of earners pay 30% of all income tax. I mean, people say, well, let's tax the rich and get more money off them. Well, up to a point, because you tax people too much and you lose all incentive for people to start new companies and create jobs.
That's another myth.
It's not a myth at all.
Pay all this money.
It's not a myth. It's an actual fact. It's from the Office of National Statistics. I haven't just made that up.
Ian, the only reason why they're paying all that money is because they're earning all that money to pay it.
I'm not denying that. But you just said they weren't paying it, and I'm telling you they are.
But you can't throw that into the frame because they would be paying it because they're earning that much more money. If we was all earning that much more money, can you imagine the tax take then? We wouldn't have to worry about anything, would we? The fact that the top 1% have got all the money, well, they should be paying a lot of the tax, let's face it. You know what I mean? Because the rest of us are not earning hardly any money. You only just earn a lot of these jobs, nearly every job that you see nowadays.
I'm sorry.
When they brought the minimum wage in, it was a good idea. Unfortunately, that's the going rate now for everybody.
No, it's really not. The minimum wage is £26,400 if you annualise it. The average wage in this country is now around £35,500. So, I mean, it's ridiculous to say that everyone's on minimum wage. They're not. And
a lot of people aren't getting that because a lot of the big corporations are only giving them half weeks, 20-hour shifts and that.
Well, a lot of people don't want to work full-time. A lot of people want to work part-time.
People are working 2 and 3 jobs, Ian.
This is nothing.
Based in London, but outside of London,
this is nothing new. This has always happened. There have always been people who've had 2 or 3 jobs.
But what all I'm saying, right? I did 17.5 years in the army, right? Now, all the time I was in the army, cuts were coming through and all that. The different, making people redundant and everything. Coming out of when we was out in Bosnia, Kosovo and all that, people getting brown lettered. Made redundant on the front line fighting for the country because the spaces were cut down So there was no promotion. So if you didn't achieve a certain rank, you were thrown out, you were made redundant. A lot of the experienced officers and all that, senior ranks, took the redundancy money, and then they tried to get everybody back in again, another load of waste of money, that was, wasn't it?
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Alex is in Bromley. Hello, Alex.
All right, first-time caller.
Welcome.
Nervous. Anyway, right. I've got different proposal, let's say, or different idea. There is money that can be taken from all the insurance companies operating. If you remember, in the beginning of the crisis in the Gulf, Lloyd's stopped insuring all of those ships, and they stopped immediately before even any kind of blockades of Iran being imposed, right? So I checked Google. Obviously, I'm not sure how reliable it is, but basically they do not insure any kind of events in war times. So my proposal is they can be taxed before those things happening. For example, they can pay an extra tax because they're not going to pay if something happens in a war time. In a way, they're paying for these deterrents in advance, if you know what I mean. And the other thing is... I
don't see the logic of that at all.
The logic is, because if the war happened, Britain is not ready to defend himself, stuff like this, all of the damages, they're not going to pay because it's in their insurance policies, right? So they can be taxed on that base.
Well, sure. If you want to drive all the insurers out of Britain, that's a very good way to do it.
Yeah, in a way, you may right, but
so you'd actually have you'd have less of a tax take than you would have done otherwise.
It's a huge business. Well, that's what I'm saying.
I know it is, but it's already taxed.
Okay, we all taxed already. Even the welfare budget, in a way, it's like double taxed.
Well, how do you work that out?
Because everything is taxed one way or another. That's why.
Well, the welfare budget is paid for out of income tax, or some of it, not all of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't know how you think that is a double tax. Because people on welfare, they're receiving the money, essentially. I mean, you as a taxpayer pay your tax, it goes into the government coffers, and then it's paid out again to people on welfare. So how's that double taxation?
Because it's going for their bank accounts and stuff like this.
Oh, well, Alex, I'm afraid I don't get your logic there at all. Now, after 8 o'clock, we'll have a special edition of Cross Question for you. We'll be looking ahead to next month's Scottish parliamentary elections, and I'll be joined by representatives from the SNP, Labour and the Conservatives, and the pro-independent stand-up comedian Susie McCabe. In just a moment, LBC Scotland political editor Gina Davidson will join me live to talk us through some of the key issues that you might want to ask our panellists about. It's 7:47.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The truly hideous act.
Iain Dale on LBC.
Stephen says the government have just given people who choose to have more than 2 children 10 billion over the course of the government. Those figures aren't quite right. It's costing... Well, no, actually, they are right, because it's costing about between 2 and 3 billion a year. And you're right. I mean, all governments choose what they spend money on, and they all prioritise in different ways. And this government's priorities are to give out 10 billion over the course of the Parliament to families who have more than 2 children. Now, that was a choice that they made. They didn't have to make it. They certainly didn't make it in the first budget. And now they have. So that is money that could go to the defence budget that hasn't been allocated to the defence budget. It could also, of course, be spent in Scotland. Now, we have a special edition of Cross Question at 8 with 4 Scottish representatives. Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader in Westminster, MP for Aberdeen South. Melanie Ward, Labour MP for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy. Andrew Bowie, Conservative Shadow Scotland Secretary and MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. And Susie McCabe, stand-up comedian who is an independent independent supporter. So they'll be here to answer your questions. We'd love questions on the Scottish elections. And just to sort of tease you up a bit, if that's not an inappropriate phrase, we have Gina Davidson, who's a real tease always. She is LBC Scotland political editor, as you know, and joins me now. Gina, I know there have been a couple of debates already. What are the big issues that are coming up in these debates? And what are the main issues where all of the different party leaders are disagreeing most?
Evening, Ian. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been referred to as a tease, so thank you for that. This election campaign has been really quite flat for the first few weeks, but I would say it's just beginning to pick up now that we're getting into the television debates. And of course, we had that kind of random entry by Wes Streeting on LBC at the weekend talking about independence and the potential for a second referendum. I mean, that has been pretty much on the back burner in this election campaign, even although John Swinney says that he wants to win a majority, says that that's what he wants to do with that majority. He hasn't really been talking independence up too much, but now the fact that somebody from the UK government is saying that it definitely won't happen, then they've absolutely jumped on that, as you might imagine. But beyond that issue, which is always underlying everything in Scottish politics, what the leaders have been looking at is the cost of living crisis, the NHS and immigration. Those are the three top issues that are being raised with them on the doorsteps by Scottish voters, and where they all have different views. And of course, on the latter, immigration in particular, we've seen the rise of reform in Scotland as we have elsewhere in the UK. Some polls suggesting they might come second, pushing Labour into third, which would be some breakthrough for them if that was to happen. Immigration being a key part of their campaign. All the other parties absolutely distancing themselves from what Malcolm Offord has to say about immigration. He's talking about housing not going to local people, but instead going to asylum seekers. He's talking about apparently concerned doctors getting in touch with him, saying that free healthcare is going to asylum seekers and it's pushing other people down the waiting list. So there's been a lot of pushback from the other parties on that, who are, of course, saying that immigration is something Scotland needs, particularly the SNP and Labour, saying we need to attract more people to Scotland to grow the economy and to deal with things like the cost of living crisis. Tax is another big issue. Again, they're all very different on that. Conservatives, Reform, want to cut it immediately, income tax. Labour have said if growth allows, the SNP are quite happy with the tax system that they've introduced. And the Greens, who launched their manifesto today, well, they would like to see taxes rise on the wealthiest Scots. We've yet to hear precisely from the Liberal Democrats what they will do on tax. We get their manifesto on Friday. And beyond that, energy is the big issue because, of course, we've all seen petrol prices rise at the pumps. And of course, we've seen energy bills go through the roof, and there's concerns that that will just continue later in this year. We've had John Swinney saying that all energy policy, some of it already is, but all energy policy should be devolved to the Scottish Parliament. The other parties, of course, saying that's ridiculous and that you have to deal with energy, particularly if you're talking about bulk buying in petrol, as Anna Sarwar is on a UK level. So what's been really fascinating, I think, is that some of them just want to talk about matters that are more or less reserved to Westminster. Others are talking about potholes and how they're going to tackle them, which are very much council matters. And there's not been so much concentration yet on just what the powers Holyrood has and how it could change people's lives, apart from when it comes to the NHS.
What about the Greens? Because in England, they seem to be storming it. But I suspect in Scotland it may be a little bit different.
It is different. They're definitely increasing in popularity if you look at the polls. I mean, there's been some suggestion that the Scottish Greens, although they're a different party to the one in England and Wales, are having a kind of Zach Polanski bounce. They think that they will come away with about 10 MSPs after May the 7th. The issue with the Green vote is it's very hard to judge when it comes to constituencies, Ian, because they don't stand in every constituency. They're standing at about 6. They generally get their MSPs elected through the regional list, through the proportional representation side of the Scottish elections. So it's hard to judge just where their vote might go at a constituency level. There's an assumption it will go SNP because they are pro-independence as well. But they're definitely on the rise. They've got a bigger membership than they ever have, and they've got 2 new young co-leaders in Ross Greer and Gillian Mackay. But they're not without their problems. One of their candidates, for instance, in Edinburgh, was saying that she wanted to abolish prisons, like full stop, just get rid of them completely, and didn't seem to have any solution for where people who did terrible things should go. And she would also like to see Scottish independence, but particularly so that Scotland can pay reparations to nations that she says were colonised in the past. So
what a way to get votes.
Some candidates with very different kind of views to what's in the manifesto.
Gina, thank you very much indeed. That's Gina Davidson, LBC Scotland political editor. Right, let's finish off the hour with Jack in New Malden. Hello, Jack.
Hello.
What would you like to say?
Yeah, it's not just about money any longer. It's about expertise. I'm trying to think of some numbers. I'm a combat system engineer. I trained the Navy how to go submarine hunting and conduct, let's say, an air defence exercise in the Straits of Hormuz.
Right.
Now, we have probably less than 500 people in the Navy that are actually capable of using the command system. And within that, there's specialisations for submarine hunting, and you're probably talking about less than 25. So it ain't just about knowing the subject. You've got to go out and practice, especially hunting submarines. And we haven't got a frigate in the water hardly that's capable of doing that, because submarines, you don't know where they are, and you have to practice time on type. And we just don't have enough personnel. And we need, I think, all benefits should be taxed and NI'd straight away to raise some money. And we need to get the right people into the right jobs. PDQ like 2 years ago.
Yeah, and not just that, they need to be trained, because one of the lessons I've learned from reading this audiobook is that training is the key to being prepared for war. And if you haven't got the people with enough training, be careful what you wish for on the battlefield. Now, OK, future wars may not well be fought on traditional battlefields, but the Ukraine war is, isn't it? So we need to take a lesson from that. Jack, thank you very much indeed. Right, coming up, it is time for Cross Question. We will be joined by Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader in Westminster, MP for Aberdeen South. Melanie Ward is Labour MP for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy. Andrew Barry, Conservative Shadow Scotland Secretary and MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. And Susie McCabe, stand-up comedian. They will all be joining me to answer your questions in just a few moments' time. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp on that number. You can text 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, and the LBC YouTube channel. Hello, very good evening. 2 minutes past 8 is the time on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. We have a Scotland special tonight. Let me tell you who's on the panel. Sitting to my left, Susie McCabe, stand-up comedian. I've been watching her on Instagram. Oh. And that's how we got in touch, wasn't it?
It was.
I thought I want her on my programme, and here she is. Next to her is Andrew Barry, Conservative Shadow Scotland Secretary and MP for West Aberdeenshire, and I always get this wrong, Kincardine.
I didn't, but you're closely in this time.
To my right, Melanie Ward, making her debut on the programme. Welcome. She is Labour MP for Cowdenbeath, and here's another one that I always get wrong, Kirkcaldy. Kirkcaldy. Yeah. And Stephen Flynn, SNP leader in Westminster and MP for Aberdeen South. They're all here to take your questions on any aspect of policy which relates to the Scottish parliamentary elections, which of course, as you know, are taking place on the 7th of May. The way to get in touch, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number. You can text 84850, and you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, or the LBC YouTube channel.
0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Right, our first question is a text question from David, who says, is Trump right about North Sea oil? Well, Donald Trump has intervened in the North Sea oil debate today, which I'm sure you're all aware of. He's blasted the UK as absolutely crazy for blocking oil drilling in the North Sea amid Europe's scramble for energy. It's a post on Trump Social. He said Europe is desperate for energy, yet the United Kingdom refuses to open North Sea oil, one of the greatest fields in the world. Tragic. 3 exclamation marks. Aberdeen should be booming. Norway sells its North Sea oil to the UK at double the price. They're making a fortune. The UK, which is better situated on the North Sea for purposes of energy than Norway, should drill, baby, drill. In capital letters, 3 exclamation marks. It is absolutely crazy that they don't. And, capital letters, no more windmills. President DJT. Stephen Flynn, do you welcome this intervention from Donald Trump?
You know what, Ian, I'm absolutely sick fed up of this guy, because not only has he decided to make oil fall from the skies in Tehran, the sewers explode and little kids get blown up in their own schools, he has, through his actions, caused the terrorists and the IRGC to block the Strait of Hormuz, send all of our bills through the roof, create uncertainty right across the globe, and then shouts into the void about windmills. And you know what? I know why he's quite angry about windmills. It's because he's got a golf course just north of Aberdeen, which has a wonderful view of a lot of windmills, which provide enough electricity, renewable electricity, to power all the homes in Aberdeen. That's why he's so anti-windmill. And on his points in relation to the North Sea, look, there's an inevitability about 2 things. There's an inevitability about the fact that this Labour government are going to approve the Rosebank and Jackdaw fields, and there's an inevitability about the fact that they're going to replace the energy profits levy with the oil and gas price mechanism, because they will, right now, be determining the fact that energy security, investment, jobs, and indeed climate emissions will likely benefit from doing so. The only reason that hasn't happened up till now is because there's a Prime Minister who's currently in office but not in power, and is being torn between Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband. And until he loses the elections on the 7th of May, probably very badly, he's going to continue to sit on the fence.
But John Swinney has completely changed his mind on North Sea oil, hasn't he? I mean, you were, the SNP was effectively agreeing with Labour on moving to renewables. Now John Swinney has completely changed tack.
Ian, me and you have discussed this topic on many an occasion, as have me and Andrew across the table. I don't think I've ever changed my mind on this topic.
No, but he has.
Once. But look, the important thing here is you have to satisfy demand. And whether we like it or not, we still require gas. The wonderful thing about the SNP government in Scotland is that we, through our policies, particularly in relation to the licensing of onshore wind, have a situation where we produce more renewable electricity than we consume. But because of the grid and because of policies controlled by Westminster, the price of that electricity is still set by the price of gas, which means despite our energy riches,
and that's a fair point.
People of Scotland
but you haven't addressed the fact that the SNP leader, the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, has completely changed tack on more drilling in the North Sea, hasn't he?
John recognises, as I think every single person in the entire UK and probably across the world recognises right now, that energy security is profoundly important. That's why we should be doubling down on investment in the very windmills that upset the President of the United States of America, and why this Labour government will inevitably make the decisions which I've already outlined.
You're an Aberdeen MP. What's your direct message to Donald Trump? Because you never know, he might watch this.
My direct message to Donald Trump probably can't be broadcast, Ian, but to be polite, this man needs to rein himself in, because he is causing complete turmoil across the planet without any sense of purpose or plan. And it's people on these isles who are reeling from the consequences of that here, and it's little kids who are being blown up in schools in Tehran because of his actions.
Melanie Ward, your reaction. You're not an Aberdeen MP, you're down the coast a bit, but what do you make of what Donald Trump has said?
Well, I think most people have probably learned in the last year and a half that it's better not to respond to everything that Donald Trump puts out on.
It's been a very boring programme if you don't.
on Truth Social. Obviously, yesterday the Pope was the target of his ire, and today it seems to be green energy. So I think.
No, it's Aberdeen.
Well, I put Aberdeen. I don't know what Aberdeen's done to offend Donald Trump. But anyway, I think it's probably better not to get into that. But there's a serious point here, obviously, about the situation with our energy, the future of our energy mix. It's really clear to us that the North Sea and oil and gas will be part of our energy mix for a long time to come yet. At the same time, we know that as long as we stay in hock to the energy markets, energy prices are going to continue to rise. You know, Stephen said quite clearly about the impact of the war in Iran and the damage that is doing to our cost of living here across the UK and, of course, at home in Scotland as well. So the sooner we can get away from that dependency on international markets, the better. That's why our government is investing so heavily in clean, green, homegrown energy. That's got massive benefits, including to people in my constituency, because of the construction of windmills or new wind turbines, which are producing, clean new energy, but also creating jobs. But an important part of the energy mix in Scotland should be, and it's something that Stephen didn't address and won't want to, should be nuclear power. There's new nuclear being built across England. Wales has had its first approvals, but the SNP, for ideological reasons, continues to block nuclear power in Scotland, and that's something that would help us as part of the future energy mix as well.
Do you accept that there should be more licences granted for drilling in the North Sea for oil and gas? Well, there seems to be a real problem within the Labour Party at the moment. You've got the sort of Ed Miliband purists who don't think anything should be granted, and they think that will be meat and drink for the Green Party at the next election. And then others who, I will term realists, who think, well, you've got to have this still as part of our energy mix. It sounds from what you've said, you're on that side of the argument.
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to remind ourselves why is it that the conversation around Jackdaw and Rosebank in particular is complicated. And the reason for that is because the Conservatives, when they were in government, made an enormous mess about the licensing here.
That's true.
And because they made a mess of it, it's been judicially reviewed. So there's a legal process going on which is effectively blocking a decision. That's why there's not a decision being able to be made at the moment.
That part's not.
Well, that it is true, because there's a legal process
underway.
Going on.
Decisions being made.
And let me finish. And I think it was pretty interesting actually to hear you able to determine what John Swinney's view on this was, because I listened to him on the BBC this morning and couldn't really understand what his position was on this at all. But when we get to the end of the process that's ongoing, then of course a decision will have to be made. In Scotland, Anas Sarwar has been really clear that he thinks it should go ahead, and I agree with him.
Okay. Andrew,
Ian.
You're an Aberdeenshire MP. Do you take exception to what President Trump has said?
I don't take exception to it. There are a number of factual inaccuracies in that tweet, but he is right that Aberdeen could be booming right now with the oil price where it is, with the oil and gas industry across the world increasing drilling and exploration. Only in the North Sea have we got a situation where the governing party, the jurisdiction, the body that decides whether or not we can explore more, drill more, get more of what we need from British waters into the British grid, is preventing us from doing so. The situation in Aberdeen was dire before Donald Trump decided to engage in his, he has described adventure in Iran, with all of the repercussions and consequences that we have seen as a result of that. The industry representatives of all political colours in that city and indeed the region have been calling for a change from the Energy Profits Levy as it is right now for some time. We've been calling for Ed Miliband to get on and approve Jackdaw and Rosebank. We cannot understand why he is blocking further exploration and drilling. There are billions of pounds out there, tens of billions, waiting to be invested in this country, securing high-skilled, high-wage jobs in Scotland. It's quite incredible to hear the Labour Party not talking up these workers who are leaving the United Kingdom, leaving Scotland, leaving Aberdeen to go elsewhere where the energy industry is growing. Of course, we want to see an expansion of the renewables industry, but the fact is the jobs in that industry do not exist yet at the level that they do in the oil and gas industry. And if we're going to keep that skills base, keep the supply chain, and bring that billions of pounds of much-needed investment investment, looking at the growth figures that we got from the IMF today, the easy answer is approve Jack Daw and Rosebank and let our oil and gas industry flourish.
Your direct message to Donald Trump is, I agree with you.
Not entirely. There was a whole number of factual inaccuracies in his tweet or Truth Social post, whatever you call it.
What were they, Andrew?
Well, Norway selling oil to the UK for double the price. That's just not factually accurate. For example, I need to read the post again, but there were a number of others. But Aberdeen could be booming right now.
Okay.
It's painful as a representative of that region that it isn't, and that is all down to the Labour Party. And frankly, as Stephen Flynn said, a Prime Minister too weak to stand up to Ed Miliband and do the right thing, which is to approve Jack Daw and Rosebank and move away from the EPL as it is right now.
You have to recognise, and I'm sure you do, you were a former energy minister.
Yeah.
And in fairness to Melanie, she didn't get this bit accurate, but the first bit of her comment she did in relation to the Finch ruling. The Finch ruling only came about in relation to Scope 3 emissions. I appreciate this is very technical and boring, to do with Rosebank, because of the mess you guys made in relation to your climate compatibility.
Well, we didn't agree with that ruling.
So don't try and pretend.
All right. No. We want to hear. We've got to hear from. We want to hear from Susie.
And that's on the war in Iran.
Can I just interject here?
Please do.
There's a problem that no one seems to be addressing here, right? As Stephen said, our grid, electricity, is still reliant on gas, and we are one of the biggest importers of gas in the world, right? Now, I'm not saying that we're paying double the price from Norway, blah blah blah. However, the problem that we've got here is our energy and utilities infrastructure in this country, on these islands, is beyond broken. And that is, we are having to import because we can't store gas, which frankly we can drill to our heart's content, but if we can't store it, where does it go? So this is the biggest issue that we've got, and this is on every single party that's been in power of all colours, because our infrastructure, whether it be our water in England and Wales or whether it be our gas and our electricity, we've got those fields, but we can't do anything about it because the actual infrastructure to support that isn't there.
I mean, that's a good point, Andrew, isn't it? Because I think it was Liz Truss that gave the authorisation to sell off our gas storage. Why did she do that?
A significant part of it. Well, I mean, the argument was at the time that you would need gas storage if you were able to supply the UK from our own gas fields. Something that, in hindsight, as with quite a few things that Liz did in her time in charge, I wish we hadn't done.
Can I just check something?
Yeah.
How long was she in power for? 42 days?
42 days.
42 days, and in that time we had the passing of the monarch, so she had 16 days off, but somehow she managed to sell our gas storage and ruin the economy for a decade. What a woman. What a woman. I tell you, I mean, I'll always say it, women get things done, because what I say, she certainly did.
Right, a follow-up question. Well, this is quite amusing, actually. I've got to read this right. It's from David in Edinburgh. Polls in Scotland suggest the SNP are on track to win a near impossible majority. Near impossible due to the voting system. Well, he says in Hollywood. I think he means Holyrood. It's the antithesis of Hollywood.
Yes.
And you want to even... No, let's not go there. If they get a majority, should John Swinney blockade Hadrian's Wall until he gets the referendum he wants? And for a bonus point, would Trump now back Scottish independence? Susie, go on, you start off on that.
Block the wall, we will keep our square sausage and our tablet to ourselves, and we will melt down that tablet so it's pure sugar, and we don't need gas and electricity.
And then deep fry it.
And then deep fry. Yeah. What a country. The country that gave the world penicillin and tablet.
Andrew.
Yeah, sorry, what was the question?
I don't know if there was actually a question.
The question about the SNP winning a majority. Look, the only poll that matters is the poll on May the 7th. We don't know what the results are going to be. The threat of an SNP majority is, of course, real. I think there's a lot of complacency in Scotland that it might not happen. And frankly, if they do secure a majority, I'm not sure I believe that Keir Starmer is strong enough to stand up against John Swinney and say no to another referendum. So I think people should be aware that this is a possibility, but as I said, the only poll that matters is on May the 7th. They're not quite there yet.
Which I would guess you would agree with, Melanie.
Well, I think I would put it in my own words and say John Swinney likes talking about independence and a whole range of other things, but doesn't like talking about his own record in government. We've had 20 years of the SNP in Scotland, and the real choice in this election is who is the First Minister when voters wake up on the 8th of May. Is it another decade of John Swinney, or is it an Anas Sarwar and a fresh start? Because there are so many things that are not working in Scotland as they should. If you take NHS waiting lists, where in my region in Fife alone, there's more than 30,000 people waiting in pain. 1 in 6 Scots on a waiting list, and the waiting lists are coming down. And okay, great. Well, the waiting lists are coming down in Scotland, in England, but in Scotland they're definitely not.
Well, I'm not sure they will be after the last 6 days, but there we are, Stephen.
Is the threat, as I think it's been termed there, of an SNP majority there? Well, of course it is, but it's for the people of Scotland to determine that. Now, I believe that they deserve a fresh start with independence. I believe that they deserve a government with vision and aspiration at its heart, which is why we've outlined policies in respect of wraparound childcare all the way through a wee one's life, of making sure that people who are in rented accommodation have the ability to receive some financial support to get onto the property ladder. And while we'll continue to invest record sums in our NHS to make sure that it's improving. But where the big issues lie in terms of Scotland's future, and the discussion right now is in relation to energy policy and foreign affairs and the big economic issues that are stopping any sort of growth in Scotland. And the only way to resolve that is to vote for the Scottish National Party to make sure that you have a fresh start with independence.
Stephen, like a lot of what you said is your party's position, and you're entitled to those views, and you're going out there and fighting for it. But it takes a bit of a brass neck to come here and claim it's a fresh start with John Swinney, the man who's been at the heart of the SNP since the mid-90s and been in every Scottish government since the SNP first got into office in 2007. It's not exactly a fresh start that John Swinney is offering.
How's your guy?
It's just more of the same.
How's your guy doing?
Well, Stephen, answer the question. He's not a fresh start with John Swinney. How can you say it's a fresh start with a man that's been at the right-hand side of Hamza Youssef, of Nicola Sturgeon, of Alex Salmond, with all that record of failure behind him?
Like flippancy aside, we live in a deeply unstable world. Do you remember what that's like, having been a part of Liz Truss's party during the time of her premiership and so on and so forth? We've got a UK government down here which has been in absolute turmoil due to the Peter Mandelson scandal and the endless U-turns. And when the world's in turmoil, what you need is stability and seriousness. Nobody typifies that more than John Swinney. Nobody typifies that more.
You did say that with a straight face, but when you accuse the British government of being full of scandal, I mean, let's face it, there have been quite a few in the SNP in recent years, haven't there?
Look, but Iain, those are things that happened in the past. What we have now is a First Minister who is trusted by the Scottish people to deliver upon their priorities. And I have to say that that's reflected in the polling that we see right now in Scotland, where he is the most popular leader, he is the most trusted leader, and the Scottish National Party are miles ahead of both the Labour Party, the Reform Party, and the Tories.
You know what's a real scandal? Is we should have gone to the break 7 minutes ago. 22 minutes past 8.
LBC.
You've probably been with the same energy supplier for decades. And why wouldn't you be? Loyalty matters. But lately, bigger hasn't always felt better. You've probably dealt with...
Right, on our panel, we have Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader in Westminster, Melanie Ward, Labour MP for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, Andrew Barry, Conservative Shadow Scotland Secretary, MP for West Aberdeenshire, and a place I can't ever pronounce right, I get it wrong every time. Kincardine. And Susie McCabe, who's very easy to pronounce. She's a stand-up comedian. And you're are you doing a tour right now, or is it about to start?
I am doing a tour right now. I was in Aberdeen and Inverness last week.
Well, I'm doing my tour in Aberdeen this weekend.
You'll love it.
I love Aberdeen.
Listen, if you go out to the right pubs, you'll bump into Michael Gove, let me tell you.
That's not an incentive.
Or for the people of Aberdeen.
So, no comment. Give us, where are you going to be?
I'm in Brighton tomorrow night. I've got my London show is sold out, but I'm coming back down in May. And then this weekend I am in Dunfermline and Perth, which are both almost sold out.
Dunfermline are my Scottish football team.
Really?
Right.
The Pars?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never actually seen them live, but I do want to. Right, Barry in Ayr says the SNP are obviously the most successful party in all of the UK and Northern Ireland. But is it not time... Oh, sorry, it's a caller. I do apologise. Right, let's go to him. Barry, What would you like to ask? I've just given half of your question there.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Throughout the whole of the UK and Northern Ireland, the SNP have been in power for 20 years, so they're the most successful party in the whole of the UK. So the question is it not time that they fix Scotland and the failing NHS and everything, rather than fixate on an independence referendum?
Well, on Sunday, my LBC colleague Lewis Goodall was joined by England's Health Secretary Wes Streeting, and he was asked whether the Labour government would grant Scotland an independence referendum if the SNP gets a majority in Holyrood next month.
We're not going to introduce chaos into the UK by having an independence referendum. Absolutely not.
So how do they get one?
And the SNP would like to make this all about the Constitution again to avoid their running, on their domestic record.
So how do they get one?
We're not having one. We were elected on a mandate.
So how do they get one?
So, they're not having one.
I bet that's gone down well among some people in Scotland. We'll come to Stephen in a moment. Andrew Bowie, was that a wise thing for Wes Streeting to say, do you think?
Well, I mean, I agree with Wes Streeting. It was in our manifesto at the general election. It is in our Scottish Conservative manifesto that we stand full square behind the result of the 2014 referendum. We don't think another referendum is necessary, nor indeed wanted by a majority of Scots, and Scotland is better off than the United Kingdom and will always be.
But if the SNP get an outright majority, no one could argue that isn't a mandate for another referendum, could they?
The power to grant a referendum lies with the United Kingdom government, and whilst I don't trust Keir Starmer not to fold if there is an SNP majority in the Holyrood election, because he is possibly the weakest Prime Minister that we've known in recent decades, I don't think that now is the time for another referendum. I think Scotland's best place within.
No, but if the Scottish
UK,
people vote SNP in large numbers, it's in their manifesto to have an independence referendum, and I accept that it's within the power of the Westminster government, but that would surely have to be seen as an electoral mandate.
I don't think it would. This is not an election in which independence is on the ballot paper. We are fighting on the competencies or otherwise of the Scottish Government and what they've delivered in their capacity as the Government of Scotland with all the responsibilities that they have, and whether or not they should have the opportunity to continue in office, or we can change Scotland for the better. That's what's on the ballot paper at this election.
Susie.
And I think we should remember that.
That's quite a fascinating take by Wes Streeting and by Andrew, because the last referendum was 2014. Now, we're saying that independence isn't in the ballot, but if the country keep voting for pro-independence parties, and there's a chance that the Greens are going to do very well in this election, surely there comes a point where we say, look, we've got to have another referendum, because, and I'm just saying this as a lowly Scottish taxpayer member of the electorate, we've had fundamental change in Brexit, which Scotland overwhelmingly rebuked, but it's got it. And Scotland needs Brexit, Scotland needs migration, Scotland needs to be part of the EU. The United Kingdom has been in a spiral since the crash of 2008. It has never recovered from the austerity that was put on by Cameron and Osborne. And then we're now looking at a situation where a generation has gone past, because now everyone likes to talk about a generation. A generation of voters has passed. A generation of voters have came through. And people should be allowed to vote. Now, if they vote, no, that's it. But at least give them the opportunity. And I'm just going to point something out here. For, 34 years of my life, my country has been governed by a party in Westminster that, not that I didn't vote for, or my family didn't vote for, or even my city didn't vote for, my actual country didn't vote for. Now, surely there's got to now be a question to say, listen, the Union is no longer working for Scotland. The Union is maybe not working as a union anymore, as a United Kingdom. And like all things, these things come to an end. You know, Ireland and the United Kingdom came to an end. I was in Ireland a couple of weeks ago. I was walking about it, and I've spent a lot of time in it, whether it be Kilkenny or Donegal or Cork or Dublin. Here's the thing with Ireland. Ireland is profoundly Irish, but it is also profoundly European. And I want to know, why can't Scotland have that? Why has that got to be at the behest of Westminster and not the Scottish population? And as much as and I completely respect your views on being part of the union, that's absolutely fine. But why are you so scared to ask the question? Just ask the question.
We'll come to Stephen Flynn and Melanie Ward in just a moment after we get the news headlines at 8:30 with Katie Dartford.
Like a great night's sleep and a tasty breakfast. You know what you're getting with Premier Inn.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:32 on the panel with me tonight, Stephen Flynn, SNP leader in Westminster, Melanie Ward, Labour MP for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, Andrew Barry, Conservative Shadow Scotland Secretary and MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, and Susie McCabe, stand-up comedian. Now, we were in the middle of answering Barry's question in air, essentially about the prospects for another independence referendum. Now, we've heard what West Streeting has said. I imagine you're going to sort of say something similar, Melanie. Or maybe not, I don't know. But, I mean, what about the mandate issue? Do you not think that if they do get an overall majority, that is a mandate?
No, and independence isn't even the top issue in the SNP's campaign in this election. For a whole range of reasons, probably not least that it's showing that public support in Scotland for a referendum and for independence is not high. It's about 35% of the electorate. So it's not even the top issue in their campaign. But it's when you ask actual voters, it's nowhere near the top of voters' priorities in Scotland either. And actually, part of Barry's question was about shouldn't the SNP focus on fixing Scotland? And I think Barry is exactly right about that. And when Stephen speaks in a minute from the SNP, you'll see again that he'll do anything to avoid speaking about the SNP's actual record in the last 20 years in Scotland. And that's not a surprise. You know, we were speaking about the future of Scotland and issues that were important. I would say that education is a massive issue in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon promised us that she would close the attainment gap between our richest and our poorest kids. And actually, it's gone up in the last year. So in my area, it's 24%. Across the whole of Scotland, it's 21%. We spoke about waiting lists before. In my area in Fife, we're losing one police officer every month because of the SNP's actions. And we've got massive problems both with antisocial behaviour and with drug deaths, which went up in the last year on the SNP's watch. And I could talk about why is it that we've got ferries which can't sail anywhere? Why is it that on the beautiful coastline in my constituency in Kinghorn and Burnt Island, we've got sewage on the beaches? And the SNP and the Scottish Water have known about that since 2019 and done nothing. Why is it that they can't build a new prison on time? There's a whole litany of excuses. I suspect you could go for the rest of the programme with this litany of failure. But
exactly. Stephen, I mean, let's address the referendum issue first. Barry thinks you're fixated on it to the exclusion of a lot of other things. Melanie has just articulated a lot of the areas where it has to be said the SNP have failed.
So to go back to the premise of the question, if I may, back to Peter Mandelson's prodigy, Wes Streeting, who's obviously trying to do his best to promote himself as the next Labour leader and UK Prime Minister.
Something you've never done.
2 secs. UK Prime Minister, come on, yes. I don't think these guys, I don't think anyone would trust me to be UK Prime Minister. There wouldn't be any question about a referendum then, geez. But look, when Wes Streeting was on that show, and you know what I really disliked was his use of the phrase they're not getting it. As if the MP for Ilford North, I think it is, who has a majority of like 100 of that, has the right to tell the people of Scotland what they can and can't do. Whilst he's on a show, by the way, whilst he's on a show to discuss the fact that in England there's a junior doctors' strike which has been underway, which is costing the NHS in England 50 million quid a day, as I understand it. It's cost around £3 billion. The Tories couldn't fix it. The Labour Party promised they would fix it. But guess what? In Scotland, under the SNP, it has been fixed. There's not been a single junior doctor strike. This goes back to the record. This goes back to the NHS.
Waiting lists.
Because when it comes to the NHS in Scotland, there's not seen a single day lost. I appreciate that Keir Starmer doesn't listen to any of you guys, but if you bear with me a second, I am, and I will answer your question. when it comes to the NHS in Scotland, there hasn't been a single day lost to strikes by junior doctors, by nurses, by ambulance crews, by porters, because the SNP has made sure that our NHS staff are paid better than anywhere else on these isles, and made sure that there are more of them per head of population in Scotland than anywhere else on these isles as well. So if people want to talk about the record, I'm more than happy to do so, but that's the reality of it. And that's why Wes Streeting was on this show, because he's failing as a Labour Health Secretary.
He was asked the question by Lewis Goodall, so he had to give an answer.
Yes, he was failing on his record whilst the SNP is delivering on theirs. And that's the difference between an SNP government and a Labour government.
Okay, but on the question of a referendum, if the Labour government stick to their guns, and even if you get a majority, and maybe you'll be sitting in the Scottish Parliament too, there is absolutely nothing you can do about it, is there? Because it is a reserved power.
So look, I'm not gonna fall over myself getting upset about what Peter Mandelson's prodigy as the health secretary.
Why do you keep saying that? Because it's a smear, isn't it?
Because I think it's important for people to understand who Wes Streeting's friends were. But look, Keir Starmer, I don't agree with Andrew. I don't think Keir Starmer's anything to worry about in this conversation either, because I don't think he's going to be the UK Prime Minister in 3.5 weeks. But look, it's not for the Labour Party, it's not for the Conservative Party, it's not for Westminster politicians to say to the people of Scotland what they can and can't do. It's for the people of Scotland to tell them that. You're a reasonable guy, Iain, and I'm sure you would agree with that.
Some of the time.
Iain, can I just say...
Can we move on? Because we're spending a lot of time on questions and we've got loads coming in. So let's try and go to another one first. Ross is in Aberdeen. Hello, Ross.
Good evening, Iain, and good evening, panel.
Evening. What's your question?
Now, my question to you guys is, in Aberdeenshire, we are facing some of the highest fuel prices in memory. The government is fairly stalled in what they're doing and what they're planning to do to alleviate a lot of these costs for rural communities. What would the panel's plan be to get targeted support to rural communities like Aberdeenshire and Moray?
Melanie.
Well, thanks very much for the question there. And I know this is a huge issue and a huge concern for lots of people across Scotland and indeed across the whole of the UK. Obviously, as Stephen rightly said at the start of the programme, the cause of all of this is the ongoing war in Iran. And the best thing that could be done to bring this to an end is for there to be a ceasefire and a permanent end to that conflict. And that's why we have been so clear since the start of this that it has to end, and it has to end now. That's why the Strait of Hormuz needs to be open and not closed.
The question is about what you can do for rural communities.
So what we can do, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been really clear since the start that price gouging from petrol retailers, which is what we've seen where they artificially inflate the prices, has got to stop and is completely unacceptable.
They deny they're doing that.
The UK government has put in place new funding for those who rely on heating oil. So in Scotland, it was £4.6 million. That went to the Scottish Government to support people. That was divided up across the whole of the UK. And obviously people who are in rural areas are more reliant on heating oil as well.
£30.
And so, well, I mean, it's your government that's distributing it, Stephen. I don't know what formula they've used, but it's up to the Scottish Government to decide how to distribute it.
£30 per head. Like the folks who like Ross, folks in Andrew Bowie's constituency,
it's up to you to distribute
rural Aberdeenshire will have seen their heating bills double by like hundreds of pounds. And Ed Miliband and Keir Starmer came out and said there's £30 each. Scottish Government doubled it because they're failing in their duty to protect people.
But it's not even £30 each for everybody. It's £30 for a specific group of people that qualify. And not everybody will be granted this relief. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of hard-working people out there who are wondering how they're going to heat their homes. And it's still cold out there. It's cold even in London at the minute, let alone in the northeast of Scotland. And how are they going to fuel their cars to get in and out of work every day?
And that's also why the government has taken action to bring down, as of this cycle, £117 on average off of everybody's energy bill. That was come off now, and also to put caps on energy prices.
Why not do what the Australian government has done, and for 3 months slash fuel duty? I mean, that would make... I mean, in the break, Susie was talking about the price of fuel that she's been paying, even though she's got a hybrid.
Yes.
But I mean, it's the same all over the country. If you did that, that would be something meaningful, rather than take sort of 5 or 10p off a litre.
Yeah.
Look, I think there are lots of options that are under review. The Chancellor's been really clear that she's looking at that.
That's reassuring.
And she has said that she will act in a targeted way to help people who are most hit and who are suffering most because of this.
I don't know what you do. I was in Inverness. It was £1.90 a litre.
It's the same in Tunbridge Wells, by the way.
I believe it. It's ridiculous. I don't know what you do, especially for those in rural areas that are off-grid and such like, but my suggestion would be go down the Australia route, slash the fuel duty, get the travel free, which obviously you can't do in England for railways because it's heavily privatised. In Scotland we could certainly do that, but again, infrastructure within the UK doesn't give the governments the flexibility because countless governments have taken everything that we've had and sold it off. So we need to go back to the very basics, and we need to make sure that if this ever happens again, which inevitably it will somewhere along the line, that our infrastructure in this country is fit to cope with it. Because the Scottish Government can, in fairness, Stephen, the Scottish Government can turn around and say, right, it's a nominal fee to use the train, don't use the car, let's try and preserve our fuel. But again, it all comes back down to the infrastructure of everything within the United Kingdom.
Andrew?
I mean, look, that unfortunately, Suze, that wouldn't work. I don't know where in Aberdeenshire Ross works, but there are very few places that are served directly by the railways, and in rural Aberdeenshire, people rely on their
buses.
Very few bus services, less and less bus services year on year due to the underfunding of Aberdeenshire Council by the SNP Scottish Government.
The MP has failed to deliver buses.
Hang on. Different discussion. I'm just joking. What this Labour government could do as a start would be to announce that they're not going to go ahead with the increase in fuel duty, which is going to come in September. So you've got drivers right now who are already struggling to fill up their car, basically to get about their daily business, to pick up prescriptions, to go to the hospital, to get to work. And this Labour government won't even rule out stopping a rise in duty. We're talking about price gouging. The only price gouging that's going on in the country right now is by Rachel Reeves in the Treasury.
To be fair, when Kemi Badenoch first made that suggestion, I mean, all of this Iran war, it could have been over by then. I suspect it won't be, and I suspect the prices will still be high. But, I mean, nobody knows what will have happened by then, so you've got to cut them a bit of slack.
Well, I think they should have announced the freeze anyway. We froze it from nearly all of our time in government. It would have been the decent thing to do for hard-working people in this country who are struggling to make ends meet, for Labour to commit to matching that. But there's other things the government could do. They could remove VAT from energy bills. You know, we're hearing about how energy bills are coming down. That's not due to any action directly
of course, as a result of Brexit,
and it's going to happen anyway.
If we're in the EU, we wouldn't have been able to do that. But
was that a Brexit klaxon? I'm quite happy
a benefit of Brexit for you.
Oh, well, I'm glad you've found one after how many years, Ian? You've been looking hard under the sofa for that. Look, the Labour government are in a position where they're going to have to take action. Now, I was listening to the Prime Minister very closely yesterday in his speech of nothingness, where he said that they continue to monitor the situation, and we've of course heard very confidently the Chancellor is continuing to monitor the situation. We don't need to monitor it. You need to go outside and look at the fuel pumps and see it was $1.98 in Aberdeen to fill up. Yep. Despite Melanie's best attempts to say that energy bills are coming down, by the summer they're going to be £700 more than when the Labour Party came into office. And of course that feeds through into every single part of people's lives when it comes to buying the chocolate in the shop or buying the wee ends of coat. All of the prices of everything are going up. Now, there is a practical thing the government could do, which is to follow the IPPR, make sure they get £8 billion of additional revenue into the Treasury and bring energy bills down by £300.
Right, major shocking announcement here. We're going to the break on time, 8:45.
This is LB 560600973.
8:47. We have Stephen Flynn, Melanie Ward, Andrew Bowie and Susie McCabe with us. Jane says, I'm a left-leaning woman. Sorry about that, who has been politically quite homeless because I cannot vote for any party that dismisses women's rightful concerns to protect single-sex spaces. Therefore, no vote from me for the SNP, the Greens, the Lib Dems or Labour. Check their dreadful performance over the Gender Recognition Act a couple of years ago. The Scottish Conservatives have consistently spoken up for women's single-sex rights, but I'm not a Tory on other issues. So what is your stance on women's rights? Please do not conflate sex and gender in your answer. Susie.
Look, I'm a patron of an LGBT charity, and look, I have got trans friends and such like, if that's what we're talking about here. And this whole issue came about. Now, I think we can all agree around this table that there was a cross-party consensus within the Scottish Parliament for the GRR, right? However, the Isla Bryson case is what put this in the map, which is a one-off. Now, the trans community are 0.06% of the population, right? But they are being vilified from pillar to post and demonised with the exact same playbook that lesbians and gays were in the 70s and 80s. Now, I understand that there are concerns about same-sex spaces and such like, and I do think within the GRR there were certain things that had to be screwed down and tightened, etc., etc. However, in my entire life, no one ever said to me when I was growing up, beware of a man wearing a dress. It was beware of a man, because since time immemorial, a man hasn't had to put on a dress or a wig to assault a woman. And that is just a cold, hard fact. And the fact that we are vilifying the trans community is ridiculous, and classing so many of them as kind of sexual deviants and rapists and such like. It's wrong. We're a better country than this, Britain, and we need to be better.
So who should Jane vote for?
Jane, that's up to your conscience when you go into the ballot box.
Melanie?
Well, I think that the reason why this issue has become so difficult for so many people is because it has brought the rights of two different groups of marginalised people to clash with each other. And so I and my party are very clear that trans people have to be, their rights have to be protected. And of course, their rights and safety, right to life and dignity has to be absolutely protected. At the same time, I'm a strong, long-time campaigner for women's rights, and protection of women's spaces really matters. And Susie, you're right about somebody in a dress, but I don't think that's the issue. It's about allowing people who are men, including, I don't mean trans men, trans women, but anybody who is a man, male-bodied people into women's spaces, and that's the problem. And so Sandy Peggy is somebody that a lot of your listeners will be aware of. The hospital where the incident took place, that she went to tribunal over, is in my constituency. It's in Kirkcaldy. I've met with Sandy a couple of times. Sandy is a regular woman, a nurse who was going to work. She was a survivor of sexual assault herself and didn't want to have to get undressed in front of somebody who had a male body. And the law has said that she has that right. And the fact that she had to take her employer, the NHS, which has wasted hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money on this whole situation, the fact she had to take them to tribunal to uphold her basic rights was not acceptable. And so the court ruling, the Supreme Court ruling, has upheld her right and the right of all women to a single-sex space. I think that really matters. And to be fair to my Scottish Labour colleagues, Jackie Baillie, who's our Deputy Leader, was clear on this from the start, and the party is now really clear that we have to uphold women's sex-based rights and make sure the rights of trans people are protected.
That also works the other way. If you're a trans man, you shouldn't be forced to go into a woman's space to change because your biological sex is female. Because you imagine being a trans man who looks like Stephen or looks like Iain and goes and being told by their employer, whether it be the NHS or Police Scotland, that you're there with your beard and your baldy hair and you are as male can be, and you're told, but you were biological female at birth, so you have to go into a female changing room. So it works for both those marginalised communities.
Andrew. Look, well, I mean, we've been very clear. We agree with the Supreme Court ruling. I think it was a year ago yesterday that was made. We stand up and defend the right for women to have safe spaces free from biological men. However, I think Susie's absolutely right. It's really important that we take a breath and examine the language and the temperature at which this debate has been engaged in over the past few years, on both sides, actually, and really take a step back to understand that at the heart of this, we're talking about marginalised communities, some people who feel very scared and vulnerable, and there needs to be dignity and decency at the very heart of this debate. And I think if we're going to move forward, because this debate is not going away, it needs to be taken in a much more measured way and conducted in a much calmer way than it probably has been up to this point.
Stephen?
Yeah, look, the Supreme Court was clear in its ruling, and I don't think anyone around the table has sought to question that. The big question now for all of us is, as Andrew says, and as Susie has outlined quite eloquently actually, is one, how do you take the heat out of this in order that you can resolve the important issue of making sure that the rights of everyone are protected. And Susie's right to highlight the fact that if you're a trans man under the law, based upon what the Supreme Court has said, you would be told to go into a woman's space despite the obvious changes that may have been made to your physical appearance. And
there's
that
a natural assumption from people that trans man's getting a kick out of being in that changing room. Now, you imagine the embarrassment of going into a changing room as a man who used to be a woman, who's now a man, and having to explain to people that you have never met, I'm being forced to use this. That's horrendous.
And this is why we as politicians can't avoid this and have to come forward with solutions.
Now, Corey has tasked me with making sure that we get 2 more questions in before the fun question. And looking at the clock, that is going to be a challenge. So let's get on with Bess in Arbroath. Hello, Bess.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can. What would you like to ask?
Hi, so my question is about the rise of far-right rhetoric and specifically the scapegoating of immigrants, because people are demonstrably worse off than previous generations. I'm a young person myself, and the lack of access to starter homes, the cost of living always rising, all of those things. But I would say after a decade of austerity, it's really that, the tax avoidance and the super rich and the impact of Brexit that are the major factors in the damage to our public sector and the ever-increasing cost of living. So what would be your plan to deal with the rise of the far right and to improve everyday life for normal people?
Stephen?
Look, it absolutely appalls me that we have a man in Nigel Farage who's caused undoubted damage economically, socially and culturally to the UK by leading the campaign to leave the European Union. And he now seeks to blame the damage which has been done to the economy on people who want to come and live here and work and contribute. You know what horrifies me more is when the Labour Prime Minister of the United Kingdom stands up and says that we have become an island of strangers, echoing the rhetoric of Enoch Powell in order to try and claw back many of the votes which his party have lost to reform by their inability to deliver the change that the public have required. Scotland, and I believe the people of Scotland, reject the rhetoric of both of those men. We are an inclusive society which seeks to make sure that those who want to come and live and work in Scotland and meet the demographic challenges that we quite obviously have, which are impacting our care service and our universities, are dealt with. And the only way to do that is to make sure you're an open and tolerant society.
Andrew?
Yeah, look, the way we get Scotland working better again is to, I think, reduce the tax burden on the everyday Scot. It's to get Scotland working. It's to promote business and growth. And absolutely, I've got no truck with the stigmatisation of the scapegoating of any section of our society. A tolerant, decent society that I believe Great Britain is in 2026 shouldn't. I certainly don't. The Conservative Party certainly doesn't. The way we tackle the far right is by beating them at the ballot box and by demonstrating what a tolerant, inclusive, forward-looking country we are, but with growth and business at its heart and a tax-cutting agenda that will get Scotland working again.
Britain is a country that, whether we like it or not, has always had a race problem, whether it be the Irish, whether it be the Windrush generation, whether it be in more modern times, the Central and Eastern Europeans. Our politicians have to do better. This is coming from the very top, and a fish rots from the head down. So to stop it, it's going to take all our politicians. What I love about Scotland is that we have got Anis Sarwar, we had Humza Yousaf as our First Minister, Anis Sarwar, and no one ever talks about their ethnicity and their background.
Which, to be fair, is the same in England. Nobody talked about Rishi Sunak.
No, I know. I wasn't saying England are...
Well, I was just checking.
Right, okay. She's touchy, let me tell you. But what I love about that, and I love the fact that I now walk about Glasgow, and I'm now seeing people from the age of 18 into their 30s who came here either as young children or were born here with a Glasgow accent the same as mine.
Melanie.
Yeah, no.
Well, I think we've seen from Lord Offord and the Reform Party disgraceful attacks.
I don't think he's a Lord anymore, is he?
Disgraceful attacks on my party leader Anas Sarwar, questioning his Scottishness and his Britishness because of the colour of his skin, and that's been absolutely disgusting, and they will not take it back. But I think we have to be honest, Stephen. I don't think it's okay just to say we don't have, everybody in Scotland's really inclusive. We do have issues. We've had issues with young people in my area doing neo-Nazi salutes. We've had problems also in my area with terrible abuse of our Muslim community, and this is a real issue. I think it's going to become more of an issue because the far right want to fan the flames of racism and blame everything that goes wrong on immigrants. But I think the way we overcome this is because the decent majority doesn't support it. That's what we've seen in my area. We have to stand up to it, tackle it, and decent good people come behind it and say,
right,
not
you've all got
welcome
about 20 seconds on this, although I might allow Melanie a bit more. This is from Martin. How important does the panel think it is that the Scottish leader of your party gets on with the leader in Westminster? Go on, Melanie.
Look, I think Anas has been really clear about his views, and that's because the person on the ballot, the person on the ballot paper is Anas, and the question that there is before the electorate is: do we have 20? We've had 20 years of the SNP. Do we have another 5 years of John Swinney, or do we have a change? Because Scotland can do so much better than we are. That's what's on the ballot paper. It's not Keir Starmer. It's do we have John Swinney another 5 years after 20 years of the SNP, or do we have change with Scottish Labour? That's the choice in front of people.
But if Anas Sarwar is First Minister, I mean, just psychologically, he's less likely to get much out of Keir Starmer than he would have been if he hadn't made those remarks whenever it was.
Oh, look, I don't think that's right. Like they're on perfectly fine terms now. Obviously, Anas has made his views clear. And everybody can see that.
You have exhausted Melody.
I think I've got a better relationship with Keir Starmer than Anas Sarwar does, which tells you.
Okay, that's your answer, Susie.
I too have a better relationship with Keir Starmer.
You've never met him. Andrew?
What I will say is I feel sorry for Melanie. I've lived through Scottish leaders falling out with UK leaders before. We've had history of that in the Scottish Conservatives, but right now I'd say Kemi and Ross are going on like a house on fire.
Right, quickly, our fun question from Kieran. Susie mentioned square sausages earlier. Is that really a thing?
Oh, it's delicious. Honestly,
you have to try it.
Really? Oh, I shall look out them out in Aberdeen.
Oh, yes.
But which other Scottish creation is the rest of the British Isles missing out on big time?
Potato scones.
Oh, good call.
That's it.
And Aberdeen buttery.
I'm sorry, Andrew, but it's called a rowie.
Well, see, this is a debate.
Fudge donuts. It's like a donut filled with custard and with fudge icing on it. And I have to say, over recess at the end of campaigning every day or too many days, I went and treated myself to a fudge donut because they're absolutely amazing and everyone should try one.
So many jokes there. Stephen.
Oh, a rowie. Andrew calls it a buttery, but in the good city of Aberdeen, it's called a rowie. And Ian, when you're up at the weekend, make sure and fill your boots.
In the real northeast, it's a buttery, Ian.
You have to have a fudge donut.
Have a potato scone.
I'm trying to lose
Have
weight.
them all. Have them all. Watch down with Iron
All in
Brew.
one go. Thank you all very much indeed. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have the Justice Minister, Jake Richards from Labour, one of Andrew's Conservative Shadow Cabinet colleagues, Alex Burkhart, Lib Dem Chief Whip Wendy Chamberlain, plus the Spectator's Lara Brown. And in the next hour, the Chair of Governors of Britain's best performing Jewish independent school has announced today that the school is going to close at the end of this academic year. Emmanuel College in Bushey in Hertfordshire will shut for financial reasons, with the war in Iran and also increased taxes being blamed. Now, within the state sector, there are almost 8,000 faith schools around the UK, making up around a third of all state schools. But is it right that faith schools still exist in Britain in 2026? Should religious institutions really still influence how schools, and especially state schools, are run? If you went to a faith school, did it have any influence over your own religious belief or lack of belief?
For LBC, I'm Katie Dartford.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Very good evening. It's 6 minutes past 9 on LBC. I want to talk about faith schools in this hour. And the reason is that a Jewish school, Emmanuel College in Bushey in Hertfordshire, is closing after 36 years as a result of sharply falling numbers. They've been facing lots of challenges. I mean, their annual fees are $29,700 a year, not cheap. And they've got 360 pupils on their roll. But they reckon that they can't continue, even though they're charging that amount of money, because of all sorts of different reasons. Predominantly, I think, they blame the national insurance rise that was introduced and an assortment of other issues. Now, one school closing, in theory, it is relatively insignificant, not to the people that go to it, not to the parents, not to the teachers, but it's made me think about the role of faith schools in our society, because, I mean, we all judge education by our own experience, I suppose. I went to a Church of England school, primary school. My secondary school was not a religious school at all. It was a normal state comprehensive. But there was a religious element to it. I mean, we sang hymns at the assembly. There would be a sort of prayer thing, and which I always thought was odd, given that it wasn't a religious school. And we have huge numbers of so-called faith-based schools in our society. I'm wondering in 2026 whether this is really the system that we should have. But on the other hand, you wouldn't want to close down a good school. And just because it's a faith school doesn't mean it's not a good school. Many faith schools are absolutely excellent. Doesn't matter what the faith is, they provide a really good education. But I want to hear from people who've been to faith-based schools from all different religions over this hour, and whether you think, given your experience, whether they are right for 2026. My school was built by the Church of England, my primary school. And it wasn't until, and this was in about 1870, I think, and it wasn't until one of the Education Acts towards the end of the 20th century that the state took over predominantly the funding of it. But there are many schools that are not funded by the state and are funded by religious institutions. Do you think that is right in 2026? 0345 6060 973. Can a religious school ever provide a rounded education, or will it always come from a certain point of view? So there will be people on both sides of this argument that I want to ring in because, as I say, I don't believe that intrinsically faith schools are a bad thing. I would not want to support a government trying to get rid of them. But there have been examples in recent years where some faith-based schools, shall we say, have gone a little over the top in their religious instruction. I'll leave it to no more than that. Let's talk to Sarah Cunnane, who is from the Independent Schools Council. Sarah, very good evening. The closure of this Jewish school in Bushey is obviously very bad news for all involved. But are you finding that more and more independent schools, whether they're faith-based or not, are looking at having to close?
We are seeing that independent schools are struggling. You mentioned some of the tax implications, the increase in national insurance employer contributions. The schools we have who are charities have lost their business rates relief, and of course the imposition of 20% VAT on parents' fees. All of these have had a huge effect on our schools because they've all happened at the same time. And what we found is, especially with faith-based schools, where the fees, I know you mentioned Emmanuel colleges there, but the fees tend to be lower in our faith schools. And so the parents aren't necessarily as price insensitive as people might think. Some of our faith schools, for example, charge as little as £75 a week or £3,000 a year. And those families are by and large the ones who have found themselves unable to continue because of the rising fees caused by these extra taxes.
And how many faith-based schools are classed as independent schools?
There are around 8,000 faith-based schools across the UK. I don't have the exact figures on how many of those are independent schools, but I do know that many faith-based schools have chosen independence so that they can have that freedom of curriculum, the freedom to practice their religion. And it's about parental choice. It's about the parents having the choice to educate their children in the religion that they are a member of. I should say that all schools, regardless of whether they are independent or state, will be inspected either by Ofsted or the Independent Schools Inspectorate, and they will be needing to have very high standards for both academia and pastoral care. So regardless of whether it is a faith-based school or a secular school, the children will be expected to have that rounded education.
But I guess it varies for the amount of religious instruction from school to school.
It very much does. And again, that goes back to the area of parental choice, because in terms of how people choose to live their lives through their faith, some people will take a more liberal view, some will take a more conservative view of how they live their life according to their religion, and many want that option in their schooling as well.
Do you get I don't know if you've got any research on this, but the reason we're talking about this, as I said, because this particular Jewish school is closing. But do you get the impression that there are many other faith-based schools that are in a similar situation to Emmanuel College in Bushey?
Yes, so when we challenged the decision to put VAT on fees, we particularly highlighted the case of small Jewish and Muslim schools who we felt were particularly susceptible to closure as a result of these changes. And the court actually agreed that these schools were more at risk as a result of the changes that were being made, because, as I said, the parental base is very different. They rely on their community for support, and there isn't necessarily the extra money coming from either the parents or the school to soak up some of that burden. We do know that we are starting to see those sorts of schools close, and what that means is just less diversity within the school system itself.
Is diversity a good thing within the school system?
It's, as I said, it's about parental choice. It's about it's not necessarily wanting the best school. Everyone wants the best education for their child, but everyone wants the right education for their child, the education that aligns with their own beliefs, values, and academic hopes. And so, yes, I think diversity can only ever be a good thing because it challenges the norm.
How much are religious schools about indoctrination, though? Because clearly, if you come from a particular faith and a particular family with a particular faith, you're going to send your children, I would have thought, to the faith school that reflects your own religion. Is it healthy for children to effectively be not taught about a faith, but effectively indoctrinated in it?
Well, I think that's a very philosophical question that people with far more interest and knowledge of theology than I am can probably answer better. But I do think, again, it goes back to how people are choosing to live their lives. If they're choosing to live their lives in that faith and they wish to have a schooling that aligns with that, then I don't see why my feelings on religion should impinge on that.
OK, Sarah, thank you very much indeed. That's Sarah Kinane from the Independent Schools Council. Megan Manson joins me now, Head of Campaigns for the National Secular Society. Just before we start, Megan, I've just got some information about the number of faith-based independent schools there are in England. There's about 900 of them, making up around 2 in 5 independent schools. Around 3 in 4 of these faith-based schools are Christian ones. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess and suggest that you might be against faith-based schools completely. Am I right?
Well, good evening. And you may be surprised to hear that when it comes to independent faith schools, our position is quite different at the National Secular Society. We believe in separation of religion and state, which means essentially no state funding of religion. So whilst we actually think that in principle there's nothing wrong with faith-based independent schools, which are funded privately, as long as they are their standards are just as high as any other independent school. But when it comes to state funding, that's a very different matter. That's where we're talking about taxpayers who are paying for religious schools, very often ones that they can't go to if they do not share that religion.
Well, again, I think most people are going to look at their own experience here. As I said, the primary school that I went to was founded as a Church of England primary school. I think it still describes itself as such, but gets, I think, all of its funding from the state. It's not a school that seeks to indoctrinate religion. It was always a very good small village school. What's wrong with that?
Well, they do seek to indoctrinate. Did you know that state-funded faith schools have inspections by their diocese, which are all about inspecting the religiosity of the school? So these schools are under pressure from their local diocese, from the church, to be ensuring that children are praying, that their RE is focused on the tenets of that particular denomination. So they are about conversion. In fact, the Church of England a few years ago released a document that said that by 2030, they want to double the number of children and young people who are converted to Christianity, and they see the state schools as a key way of doing this.
And I mean, I don't know the answer to this question, but I mean, how much money does the Church of England put into a village school? The state will obviously put the most money in, but does the Church of England fund these schools at all?
I don't think so, not really. I mean, it depends on what kind of school it is. So if many of these are voluntary controlled, these are pretty much entirely funded by the local authority. If it's a voluntary aided school, then a percentage of that school's wealth is funded by the church, about 10%, and it's normally to do with the building. So the 90% of the funding actually comes from the state. And in practice, what happens is sometimes those schools can get a grant from the local authority to cover that 10%.
I'm going to say something controversial now. I don't believe that religion should form any part of a child's education. I don't believe there should be a subject called religious studies in secondary schools. I think it is important to learn about different religions, but I think that should be part of the sort of general history curriculum rather than a separate subject. Now, I don't know what your views on that are.
I would agree, actually. I would have said that it should be taught within a different subject, not necessarily a dedicated one for religious education. What we see with religious education is that the curriculums are locally determined, for one thing. That's the only part of the compulsory curriculum that is determined locally rather than nationally. So there's a bit of a postcode lottery as to what sort of RE you're going to get. It's very much informed by people who have quite a particular bias towards their religion. The religious leaders sit on the bodies that make these curriculums, and they differ depending on whether it's a community school or a faith school. Faith schools, particularly voluntary aided faith schools, can teach RE completely from their religious viewpoint. So I would also rather see, I think it is really important to teach about religion and worldviews. Religion is an important social force, and children should learn about it and what it means in society. But as you said, that could be done in the context of a different subject. Citizenship is a key one, I think. I think that teaching religion and worldviews as part of citizenship could make this subject a lot more balanced and objective and pluralistic as well.
Megan, thank you for joining us. That's Megan Manson there, Head of Campaigns for the National Secular Society. When I did religious studies in my secondary school, which was not faith-based at all, my religious studies teacher, Mr. Slatter, was an atheist. But then again, I've always thought of atheism as a bit of a religion in itself. Controversial, eh? 19 minutes past 9 on LBC. We'll come to your calls in just a few moments.
This is LBC.
A new policy before the 28th of May. New customers over 50 only. Terms and conditions apply.
Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
21 minutes past 9 on LBC. I haven't reminded you for a long time that you can now watch the whole 3-hour programme live on Global Player, the LBC app, or the LBC YouTube channel. And indeed, you can comment on the YouTube channel, and we might even read some of them out. Well, YouTube comments are, shall we say, a little bit of a delicacy, aren't they? So we might read some of them out, but possibly not others. So the question we're asking in this hour is, do you think that faith schools still have a future in this country? Are they in some ways dangerous? I think there are some that are a bit dangerous, frankly. Not all, not even most, but there are some. And I often wonder how some of them pass the Ofsted inspections. Let's go to Derek in Cullen in North Scotland. Hello, Derek.
Good to hear from you, Ian.
Hi, well, it's good to hear from you.
Thank you. You were on fire last night, by the way. I really enjoyed it.
What did I do last night?
Let's just say you called a spade a spade.
Oh, we were talking. Oh, no, I remember now, yes. Anyway, back to tonight.
Don't set an offence. That was just brilliant. Cheering you on. Yeah. Another LBC presenter I heard today was James O'Brien in respect of what's happening with Donald Trump. And James said something interesting. He says, nobody can prove that any God exists.
No, they can't.
I just thought, I can just imagine all the people of religious bent clutching their pearls at that one.
Well, I'm not sure they would, because it's all about faith, isn't it? That there's a reason for that word, and if it was provable, you would call it something different, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but have you ever spoken to a religious person?
I've met many times on this programme, and I mean, yes. I am not a religious person. I do not believe in God. But then again, I won't say I'm an atheist, because you can't prove that God doesn't exist either, can you?
Well, I asked my young lad, just apropos of nothing at the time, says, which God do you believe in? And he said, Thor. And I was like, that's my boy.
The God of thunder.
I says, well, you just keep thinking like that, mate. Good. At what point does mythology kick in? At one point, everybody in a certain part of the world would have believed in Zeus, Thor, Poseidon.
Mm.
And at one point in time, that became mythology. So when does modern day religious things come under mythology? I've always wondered that.
Well, I can't answer that question, but I've always thought that religion, and this might be controversial to some people, but religion has always been used as a way to keep people in order, to know their place, and to rely on religion in all sorts of different ways. Religion was effectively the state up until, centuries ago. Whereas now we have a state organisation that effectively, I think, has replaced religion in some people's minds. I mean, you don't have to you don't pray to the state. You just give your money to it. Yeah.
Do you often wonder as well that religious people, out of all the religions they could have picked, they picked that one. Why?
Because generally they were brought up in it. I mean, the number of people who are converted to a religion is comparatively small. It comes through your. I mean, I always say I may not be a sort of worshipping Christian, but I would say a lot of my values are basically Christian values because I was brought up in that regard. I was brought up. I mean, I was confirmed in the Church of England. I never believed a word of it. But I was 12 years old or something, so you just go along with it. But
also, if you don't follow a set religion, then that seems to mean, according to religious people, that you don't have any morals. I don't get that either.
Well, I don't need religious instruction to give me morals.
To know what's right and wrong.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Anyway. Back to the school thing. I just think it's ridiculous to be still having this conversation in 2026 because schools are there to teach children how to think. It's there to encourage and develop curious minds and imaginations. That's something that Einstein once said. Imagination encircles the world. Everybody is capable of imagining things. We don't know what half the things are at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, but we can imagine. And that's the key to, as far as I'm concerned, our future. Keep asking questions.
I totally agree, but I think a lot of schools, and this is not restricted to faith schools, but there are too many schools, and maybe more in our history than currently, that do not want to encourage children to think for themselves. They want to produce robots at the end of the process.
And that word that you used in that last conversation, indoctrination.
Yeah.
There are churches for that kind of thing. And it should be, as far as I'm concerned, if you're over, say, 18 and you can think for yourself, you are mindful enough to make a decision as big as something like that, to discount all other religions in the world and just think by one discourse. And
But you see that a good example of people not thinking for themselves is when you're a political party canvasser and you go knocking on doors at election time, and of course we're in the middle of local elections or parliamentary elections in Scotland at the moment, and someone opens the door and they say, "Oh yeah, I vote Conservative because all my family have done for generations," and you're thinking, well, can't you think for yourself?
Think for yourself.
And like you open the door to a middle-aged woman who says, "Oh yeah, my husband sees to that. I do what he says." Now you don't get as much of that now as you used to, but certainly when I first started in politics in the 1980s, I mean that was a regular occurrence. And why is that? That's because over a period of education, people are not taught to think for themselves. They're either taught to be, if you're a woman, you were taught to be subservient to your husband, or your family maybe indoctrinate you, not just in religion, but in your politics. Derek, I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Matt, who is in Beverley. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Ian.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think schools indoctrinate children, actually, but the idea of schools promoting any kind of religious idea, whether that be obviously like making children pray each day, which happens in some Catholic schools, or even kind of through the back door, if you like, where, they're making children sing vaguely Christian songs or making them say a prayer.
I can remember singing Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam.
For sure.
Didn't get
Shine,
me.
Jesus, Shine. There's so many songs that children sing. And to be fair, if schools are following the law, their acts of collective worship, which is what they should be having every day, should be broadly and mainly of a Christian nature. That is the law that every school should abide to. But that just feels ridiculous. How can anybody think that's okay, that children are basically indoctrinated into a particular religion?
Well, if you are a devout Christian, a devout Catholic, a devout Muslim, a devout Jew, devout Sikh, you will see absolutely nothing wrong with your children going to a faith school where they're indoctrinated in your own religion. You'll see that as part of the childhood process.
Yes, you might do. But I feel like our society should be at least creating a space where children can not be indoctrinated in those beliefs, can have an education where they are made to think and question those kind of beliefs. And if a family wants to educate their children in their particular religious beliefs, that's their prerogative, obviously. But for me, our education system, whether it be a Church of England, a Catholic school, a Muslim school, a Jewish school, whatever it is, that should not be a place where children are given a particular religious belief and made to think that is more likely to be true than evolution or any other humanist belief. It just seems, I don't understand how anybody can argue with that.
Well, I'm not going to. Matt, thank you very much indeed. More of the calls to come. What is your view on faith schools, particularly your experience? Do you think that you were indoctrinated in the faith school that you went to? 0345 6060 973. Just to say, there's a new episode of the Where Politics Meets History podcast out right now with me and Tessa Dunlop. We talk about, Tessa's theory that all wars are down to men. As you can imagine, we had a spirited discussion on that. We also talk about Viktor Orban losing the Hungarian election and much more besides. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Katie Dobb, or possibly not. Maria, thank you for your call. What would you like to tell us?
Thank you, Ian. I just want to say I actually went to Emmanuel College.
Oh, did you?
But it wasn't called Emmanuel College then. It was called Rosary Priory. And it was a convent school, a Catholic school. I was going to say,
that sounds a bit Catholic.
Yes, and the thing was, at that time, half the school was Jewish. So
right.
we had Jewish girls and Catholic girls in the same school.
Which is a good thing, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
And what happened when there was sort of the religious side of it, though?
Right. What happened was when it was like Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, or anything like that, they would call in the rabbi and he would do the service.
And would the Catholic pupils also attend?
No, not necessarily. No. It would be separate, but everything else was together. The whole sort of like, and it was run by nuns, by the way. It's run by nuns. So, and it's quite a difficult place to get to because it's not off a main street or anything like that. So we had to catch coaches to get to the school. And the nuns treated everybody the same. If your skirt was too short, you were told about it.
Quite right, too.
If you were wearing the wrong shoes, you were told about it. The only difference was that they had a different service. My best friend was Jewish, Alison.
Well, at my Church of England primary school, my best friend was Catholic.
Well, there you go. And all I'm saying is, for me, I've always gone to a church school, and all my 3 children have gone to a church school as well. It's just mainly because of the education and the way they, teach you your morals. They do actually teach you to question. There's nothing wrong with question. If you didn't believe in something, you could question it, and that's the whole point of it. Religion is a choice. If you go to a Catholic school, they can try and indoctrinate you, but it doesn't mean you're going to go to church every week. It's a choice, and it's a choice that you have to make as an individual. But I had an amazing time at that school, an absolutely amazing time. And you wouldn't even know that one girl was Jewish and one girl was Catholic because we all mixed together. But it was such a strange thing to walk into, that half the school was Jewish. But what happened was the convent ran out of money. It ran out of money and had to close. And that's when it got taken over by Emmanuel College.
Right. Well, thanks for giving us that context. Thank you very much, Maria. Great call. Margaret is in Clapham. Hello, Margaret.
Oh, hello, Ian. Nice to speak to you again. I thought I must ring you because I've sort of come into the conversation slightly later. Now, my own part, I went to a Catholic school when I was growing up. I'm sort of your era. And it was very strict nuns. I remember thinking when I met a nun in the sixth form that she was the only one who taught us about other religions. She was very much different than the other nuns. And it was very, very, very interesting. And I always took that on board. And when my adult children went to school, I purposely put them into a school which, obviously it was many years later, which were teaching all different types of religions. And I thought that was very, very good. That opens your mind. You meet, different children, so to speak, from all sorts of different backgrounds, although it was around sort of the Clapham Wandsworth Common area, which is very affluent anyway. Now, my main reason for calling up tonight is I actually have a situation at the moment, a family member. Now, within marriage, they are Muslim. And he's year 9, and the family took a decision to send him to an Islamic boarding school in South Africa, which I was deadly opposed to for a number of reasons. And everything that came true, what I sort of predicted came true, that the standard of education for the English, maths, science, normal subjects was very, very poor. And the main focus that people were there was for the Islamic education of the Quran in remembering it. There's a specific way of remembering the Quran. And he had to leave the school very suddenly last December because of a very bad car accident. South Africa is a very different country than the UK. And the boarding school didn't take proper responsibility. And thankfully, he was brought to a hospital and, colleagues too. And then when he came back to the UK, the family decided to put him into another Islamic boarding school. Again, I wasn't happy with it. And I researched a lot of these schools with a few of my friends who are teachers. And all the Ofsted reports are very, very poor, very poor. So he's been attending this school for a few months. And most of the time, the teachers who are meant to be teaching the English and maths and science are not hardly attending. And the level of the Islamic education is moderate. It's okay. But this is a private school. The family, who don't have that much money, are paying thousands. for this particular boy.
But why would, I'm intrigued as to why on earth any family would want to send their child to be educated in a country thousands of miles away.
Well, I can tell you why. It was with good faith. In the mosque, there was a few people who were sending their child to this same particular boarding school in South Africa. It came with great recommendations. It was all done, he'd always wanted his sons to do this. It's a very special thing that a lot of Muslim people do. They send, I think it's more so the boys than the girls, although girls do attend Islamic schools too. I know another gentleman who sends his children to Islamic boarding schools in Leeds, that area. But he always wanted to send them there to do something maybe that he hadn't had the opportunity to do when he was young. And so it's a special Islamic teaching. And because of reference of the people that he knew who had already sent their children there to South Africa, it seemed to him a great opportunity. But I was opposed to it because I said it's a long way away. He's only 12. He's away from home. I mean, these boys that we have in the family, they are picked up and they are brought home from school. There's no wandering around. There's no mobiles. There's no this or that. We're quite strict within the family, which they're used to. So it's a big thing to go that far.
Yeah.
And I said to them, do you know what the level of normal education would be like? English and maths. Bearing in mind this is year 8. And these are crucial years for any student, be it, whatever country you're in. And the thing is, it failed on a number of levels. The education, the English, maths and science was very poor. The Islamic was so-so. They did a lot of focus on the Islamic education in South Africa. But because of this significant car accident that happened, or minibus accidents.
Margaret?
And the same thing is happening this is what I want to put across to you before I go. The education for the English and maths and science subjects, not just in the boarding school that he's at in Bromley, but they're all attached to each other. They are all substandard. And people are leaving. They are withdrawing their children from there.
But surely they will know from the Ofsted reports that they're substandard in those subjects. So why I don't really understand why they would send them there in the first place. But Margaret, thank you very much indeed. John is in Coventry. Hello, John.
Good evening, Ian. How are you?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Yeah, so I want to say from my personal experience, I was brought up in a faith school and it gave me a great moral direction throughout life. It made me aware of the wider world. It made me sort of a more of a moral upstanding person. And I think a lot of these newer schools that basically focus on management of children, so you've got children coming in nappies and all the rest of it, and for some reason, I didn't see that in my school, and I didn't see any.
Well, none of us did, because I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming you're not a teenager.
Over 50.
Okay, yeah, but we didn't see that because it didn't happen.
No. But I think morally, it's a Catholic school, and we had like a wider outside of school support system. We had the church, we had a lot of contact, and to be fair, I don't want to sort of asperge other religions, but you don't see that so much. We had a lot of charitable responsibility in the community, and we helped a lot of people, and I don't see that so much these days, and it seems like a lost thing. But in my experience, particular faith school was absolutely fantastic, and it gave you a wider understanding and a deep education and a responsibility to humanity, basically. I think it was quite a good experience, but I can't say that of all faith schools, because I'm hearing a few stories about some that are a bit toe curling. So I think if we do the absolutes, that's where we get the error. I think if we go towards more, how did this work originally? That's where we want to head towards.
Well, John, I think you make a very good point there. Thank you very much. Jim in Kent says, I've no problem with faith-based schools, but I resent the fact that my daughter wasn't allocated our preferred primary school, despite it being our closest, as children whose parents go to church were prioritised. How is it right in 2026 that a child doesn't get their closest school because another child's parents go to church? Well, that's opened up a can of worms, which we've only got 15 minutes to explore. But I can see why you would be resentful of that. And there are plenty of faith-based schools that do operate that system. And I suppose, I mean, if you are a faith-based school and you are a parent who does genuinely go to worship in whatever religious institution it is, you'd be a bit annoyed if your child didn't get in there and some atheist child did, wouldn't you? I mean, looking at it from the other perspective. But however you paint it, it's not particularly fair, is it? I've never really understood how children are allocated to different schools. It can't just be done on geography. I completely accept that. But otherwise, you've got some sort of selection procedure going on, which we're told we don't have anymore in this country. More of your calls to come, 0345 6060 973. It's 9:45.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, James Hansen.
At 12, should we be more open about sex?
9:48. Andrew says, Iain, I imagine catchment area is a bigger driver than faith. I suspect there are lots of newly converted Catholics in recent years. Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are parents who go to church or whatever in the months leading up to the allocation of a place. And then as soon as their child gets a place, you never see them again, which I think is pretty disreputable, isn't it? But I suppose you think you're doing the best for your child. Let's go to Laura, who's a first-time caller in Hemel Hempstead. Hi, Laura.
Hello, Iain. I have to say I always admire you standing up for what you believe in.
Well, thank you.
So just to say that with Jewish schools, there are varying degrees of how religious they are. There are a lot of people that send their kids to Jewish kids to school because, they're not ultra religious. But there is one factor which has got stronger since October the 7th. It's been very uncomfortable for a lot of Jewish children at non-Jewish schools, so they've had to, try and get places in Jewish schools, and that is a huge consideration these days. So from that point of view, not a religious school, but schools of religion are important, and I'm afraid that is a fact of life at this time. It has increased, so that's why a lot of Jewish kids go to Jewish schools. But they are open, and they're brought up as good citizens of the country. A lot of those schools.
No, I completely accept that. But do you know that in Jewish schools, are the kids taught about other faiths as well?
Yes, they are. They are. They have a broad. They have a very broad outlook. But what I'm trying to say is, as I'm sure with Church of England schools, Catholic schools, and probably Muslim schools, I'm not sure, but you have varying degrees of the school's outlook on religion. And obviously, if parents are very religious and they want their child to have their religion's upbringing, they'll send them to a very religious school. But in a lot of the Jewish schools, and I know of kids that go to them, they have a very broad outlook. They study all religions, and it's about throwing the blanket over everybody. They're usually very mild, and they look at everything, and they have a very good standard of education. And I believe, I won't swear to it, but some non-Jewish kids, they try to get them into the Jewish schools, and they do go.
And there are lots of Muslim kids in Jewish schools as well. I know. I was reading about one in Birmingham the other day.
Yes, I know of that school. Yes, and this has been happening for years, because all the kids mix together, and they're all friends, and they're taught about everything, and the education is very good, and that's what most parents want for their kids, as you've been saying.
Absolutely right.
Education. Yeah.
Laura, thank you very much. Gordon says, I'm Scottish, and everything was affected by religion and the Protestant-Catholic divide in the 60s. Not only schools, but there were also completely religious golf clubs. Really? Oh, my goodness. I decided to become an atheist when I was aged 10 in 1968, when I had never heard the word atheist and didn't know what an atheist was. But I became one. I've had a fantastic life without having to worry about some invisible entity telling me what to think and what to say. Well, Gordon, you and I are kindred spirits. Grace in Ealing, however, will have some very interesting views on this, because a phone-in on this would not be complete without you, Grace.
Oh, thank you. I think most people find me very boring, actually.
No, not at all. Well, if they did, we wouldn't have you on.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I do think it's very important for people, including young people, to decide for themselves what they believe. And in some sense, therefore, the concept of religious schools to me does seem a bit peculiar. And yet, a lot of evidence shows that they tend to perform fairly well, and therefore they're oversubscribed. So for some reason, they do seem to do quite well in terms of educating kids. The reason I personally wanted to go to a church school was I was quite bullied in primary school. Like the non-faith school that you went to, we still sung hymns, so it was a completely normal state primary school, but we did sing hymns. But I was quite happy there, and I thought church is a friendly place, so maybe a high school that's connected to a church will be friendlier than my primary school. At that point in my life, I didn't really know what I believed. I was increasingly thinking, it doesn't make sense to believe in God. And then a bit later on, I came to see that I did think there are actually very good reasons relating to science and philosophy for concluding God to be real, that he exists. And I came to believe, by thinking through and looking at the reasoning and listening to academics on it myself. And the school I was in didn't really determine what I believed, and most of the kids there were not remotely interested in anything to do with God. As you said, they had parents who went to church for a little bit so that they could get into the school, and that was about it. But it seems odd to me that some people want to presume kids are all being indoctrinated if they themselves presume that they are independently minded and not indoctrinated. I'm not saying that you're making that presumption, but you evidently have not ended up believing, even though you went to a faith school. Lots of people went to faith schools, or at least schools with hymns, and didn't believe. So I don't know why some of those people then presume that other people have been indoctrinated.
Well, I don't know whether it's about have been indoctrinated, but if you are a faith school, inevitably part of your remit is going to surely be to make sure that all the kids that come through your school are believers.
Well, no, that's not what happens. I see what you're saying, of course, but in my experience, a lot of the kids there, like I say, had no connection to church or interest in it at all, or interest in God. And the only thing that was different was that we would have communion about once a term, unless we chose to go on additional occasions.
Well, that's bizarre, isn't it?
Well, it was just like a big assembly, frankly. You didn't have to take it. You would sit and listen to someone talk for a little bit, and most people just had a laugh during the songs and didn't take them seriously. And we had RE GCSE, but it was very honestly objective. That they would say some Christians believe this thing for these reasons, and some Christians believe this thing for these reasons, and some people say that these reasons are wrong, and they presented these different views as though they were...
It sounds like a BBC phone-in. Some people say this, other people say that.
Yes, there was no kind of obligation to believe anything in particular. And I've got two sisters who both went to the same schools as me, and one of them ended up believing via very different reasoning from myself, and the other doesn't believe. So I think kids can end up in completely different places, because ultimately most people do work out for themselves what they believe in time, and it's not necessarily realistic to think that all kids are just being indoctrinated in faith schools. As much as I see that it's a weird concept, I mean, my primary thought about the people I was mixing with at my high school, which was a C of E school, was that there was actually a lot of diversity, that there were people from other faiths, there were people from very different, both class and ethnic backgrounds. So it was actually a really good experience, more than my primary school, of mixing with very different people.
And I mean, I've got a text here from Michael who says, on this one, all faith schools should be closed forever, says Michael. Now, I think that would be a very radical step to take. And even though, I think you can't say that for independent schools, because, if you're in an independent school and you've got funding for it, why should the state stop you from opening a school with some degree of faith attached to it?
Yeah, and as I said, a lot of people want to send their kids to these schools, so they're obviously doing they're all different from each other, but quite a lot of them are doing something quite right in educating kids.
Grace, I've only got a minute and a half left, and I just want to have a quick word with Yusuf in Nottingham. So thank you for your call. Yusuf, very good evening. As I say, we haven't got much time.
It's all right, Ian. Good evening. Nice to speak to you too. So I'm a Muslim, and I went to a Catholic school in Nottingham, and from a very young age, a primary school, to be fair. And to be honest with you, I thought it was a very good experience coming from a Muslim background, having that kind of connection with different, mainly Christians, but also Jewish people that used to go to the school as well. So I think it should happen more often, if I'm honest, because it allows you to understand different religions. It allows you to kind of mix with people and understand their viewpoints, which I think is necessary for people from different faiths.
Were you ever tempted to convert?
No. To be fair, Ian, no, I was never tempted to convert. So my dad obviously came to the UK in the 60s, I think it was, and he was saying, look, you're living in England, right? I'm going to send you to a school. At that point, he wanted to send me to be honest with you, it was convenient because it was close. And he says, it's a Catholic school. Yeah, they've got good values. Go there.
Yusuf, I wish I'd phoned in a bit earlier in the hour because I'd like to have had a long conversation with you about it, but time has beaten us. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'll be back tomorrow from 7. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's James Max. But right now, in for Ben Kentish, here's James Hansen.
Thank you, Ian. Good evening. Coming up, a Labour MP has